Well, good morning. For the sake of time, we'll go ahead and get started this morning. This meeting of the Rural Veterinary Incentive Program Committee is called to order. The time is 10:03 a.m. Welcome everyone to the Animal Health Commission, our humble headquarters here. So some of you have been here before and maybe some of you haven't. But we got a chairman of our commission has a tradition that we say the Pledge of Allegiance at the first of the meeting. So I would like to start this meeting off that way. So if you'll join me. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Our first item of business is to do a roll call. So I'm Andy Schwartz. Mr. Kevin McDonald, present. Dr. Guy Lonergan, present. Dr. John August, present. Dr. Stephen Gola, here. Dr. John Clater, here. Dr. Courtney Pace, here. Dr. Charles Graham, here. Dr. Allie Broyles, present. Quorum is present. For the record, there are 8 members present with 1 absent. So to kick things off, I'd like to ask each of you to do a little introduction. You probably know each other better than I know you in some cases, but if you don't mind giving a little introduce yourself to the rest of the group. So if we could start with you, Dr. Lonergan.
Thank you. I'm Guy Lonergan. I am the Dean of the Texas Tech University School of Veterinary Medicine.
Stephen Gola, mixed animal practitioner in New Braunfels, Texas, immediate past president of the TVMA, guest of the Texas Tech system.
I'm Dr. Allie Broyles. I'm a veterinarian, equine veterinarian in Weatherford, and I'm a member of the Texas Animal Health Commission.
Good morning. My name is Sandy Ayala, and I'm the Legislative Relations Specialist here at the Animal Health Commission.
I'm Charlie Graham. I built the Elgin Veterinary Hospital from scratch. Recently sold it, but I still own Southwest Standing Station, the oldest continuous standing operation in the state of Texas.
I'm Courtney Pace. I'm a private practitioner, a practice owner. I took over a long-standing practice outside of Lubbock in 2016. So I'm here on behalf of Texas Tech. Sorry.
Good morning. I'm John August. I'm Dean of the College of Veterinary Medicine and Biomedical Sciences at Texas A&M University.
I'm John Clater. I live in South Texas in Pleasanton, animal practitioner, and I'm here because John Sharp wanted me to come here. So,
Welcome. So I'm Andy Schwartz, the Executive Director of the Animal Health Commission, a long-time employee, 32 years with the agency, in the last 6 years, going on 7 years as Executive Director. So pleased to be here today, and pleased that the legislature saw fit that the Animal Health Commission should administer this program, and thank you for all of your interest. I know there's been a lot of work done already, and I appreciate what Mary and Sandy have done on our staff to get ready. Are we close to having the point up?
We are working on it, but fortunately we always have a backup plan when technology is involved. And so if you'll move on to the next agenda item, we can get started. Thank you for...
You want to introduce yourself?
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah, so I'm Mary Ludifer. I'm the General Counsel for the Texas Animal Health Commission, along with Sandy Ayala, our government liaison. I've had the pleasure of learning about this program and trying to bring some recommendations to the committee. I've also had the joy of working with some of the staff that we'll talk about later on, and because of conflicts, we have some agencies that can't be here, but will be a definite partner in this initiative, and work with TVMA, Trent Hightower, thank you very much, in trying to bring some rules for us to start with. This is a new program, and when there's new programs and new legislation, there are things you figure out as you're implementing that may need to be revisited, and we'll talk about those. But for the most part, we're gonna really dive in, and please know that any recommendation that we're bringing to the committee is just that. We are not married to anything. We may have missed something, we may have, overlooked something, or not thought of something. And so please, especially given your backgrounds and your experience, we are really relying on this committee to make this program the best it can be to recruit those rural veterinarians to serve an industry that, before COVID had issues. You know, I think every agency and every industry is having labor issues, but this is something that was there well before those. And I'm excited that y'all are part of the team that will, initiate, this program for Texas to hopefully make a difference. So with that, we'll jump into, at the will of our chair, agenda item number 4. And I'm gonna save some time here. I believe every member is familiar with the rural challenges, and they're very diverse and multifaceted. We can't say there's one thing that contributes to why our rural communities have a challenge recruiting and keeping veterinarians in the community, but we know to serve our food agriculture that there needs to be change. And so that's what the committee is here for. That is the purpose of House Bill 1259, is to bring some options, some potential solutions to that. As far as the history, we have some interesting things to manage in the language of the bill, because it was moved from A&M, who had the program, and from what I understand it wasn't funded, but it was given the program, the foundation to address this need a while ago. And as it continues to be a need, we shifted directions to house it at Animal Health Commission, because our agency works in the rural communities. The veterinarians are the first line of defense for Texas in mitigating and responding to diseases. And so my understanding is they thought the Animal Health Commission would understand and appreciate the need and the value of the program, and that's why we're administering it. Please forgive the General Counsel's lack of knowledge, my lack of knowledge in this field. I'm used to quarantines and contracts and things of that nature, not federal funding. But it landed with the Texas Animal Health Commission in 2021, and we've been working in the interim. It was funded in October with federal funds of $1 million, and we'll talk about that more in the next item. But we're here to discuss the plans and the next steps, and we'll get into those with the following agenda items. There are some of you in the room that I know probably have a greater understanding of the history of the RVIP program, and if I overlooked it in anything, please let me know. But if you don't have any comments on this, we can move to agenda item 5 and really get into the legislation that brought this forward.
Okay. Anyone want to add what Mary has said so far? Okay, we'll move to agenda item 5. The next item of business on the agenda is the program administration and activity between the committee, the Higher Education Coordinating Board, the Texas Animal Health Commission, and component agencies and universities.
All right. So just a breakdown of the different components that we're all going to play. For the Animal Health Commission, we administer the RVIP. That includes bringing these questions and language for consideration before the committee. We will also, once we have direction from the committee on the application, the eligibility, we will then assist in developing the application, the request for application, the documents that the students or the graduates from a vet school need to complete to apply for the program, and that would be brought to you at a later meeting. Then once those applications are filled out, we pre-screen those applicants for eligibility and bring that to the committee. So we'll get guidance from the committee today, but your primary role is to review and propose rules for comments. You review the comments and adopt final rules for program implementation, and we're just kicking that off today with the rule recommendations. And then committee members will review and evaluate and select the recipients and determine the award amount, unless today you guys decide to do an alternative action. You could appoint a subcommittee to review those candidates, or you could appoint a expert panelist. It's really up to you as how you want to structure the framework of recipient selection, but we can discuss that later on. But this is what was contemplated by the statute, but you can be more focused than what was provided there. Then the Higher Education Coordinating Board, that's this last acronym in the third column. They administer the RVIP account, and once the applicants are selected, they will make the award to who the committee determines is the required payees. You can decide to pay the lender directly or both the lender and the vet student. We'll talk about that more, and that's a committee process and decision point. Then they also allow for reimbursement of the Animal Health Commission for cost of administering the program for up to 7% of the program. So with the $1 million funding, ARPA funding, that could be $70,000 if earned by the agency. That's the program administration. So moves us to agenda item 6. If there's any questions or pause on the program administration.
Mary, I had a question on the 7% versus 3% in the bill language. The committee would determine that. What's the difference there?
The 7% is for the Texas Animal Health Commission, and 3% is allocated to the Higher Education Coordinating Board.
Oh, gotcha, okay.
I believe it goes to the workload, is my understanding.
Thanks, I missed that. Thank you.
So that's a cumulative 90% payout. 3% plus 7, is that right?
10. It's
The payout.
Oh, yes, okay.
Okay, any other discussion on item 5? We'll move to agenda, item 6. The next item is the state and federal statutes, rules, and regulations related to the program.
So we're here because of House Bill 1259, and that is our primary legislation that authorized this program during the 87th legislative session. And that administered the program, as I mentioned, from A&M to TAHC, and it established the committee makeup, which we spoke about earlier and is outlined here. It also outlines some of the minimum requirements for the eligible recipients and conditions for an award. And then, as we mentioned, it directs the Higher Education Coordinating Board to administer the account. In looking at House Bill 1259, anytime you have new legislation or changes in legislation, as you go through the implementation phase, you identify things that may be more challenging in the implementation phase than initially contemplated. And so I want to talk about a few things of interest related to this legislation and the funding, just to give us a framework of some of the challenges we are still working through. We do not have the solutions, we do not have the answers, but we are working with the Higher Education Coordinating Board and getting guidance from the governor's office on how to best move the program forward with some timing limitations that are identified with the federal program. But we also have identified some things in our state statute that just are things we need to work through. And one of the requirements is that the promissory note for the graduates or licensees that are awarded this funding, it says the promissory note should be in agreement with the university system. And from what my conversation is, we're working through it with the university systems, is that may be some holdover language with the bill being moved from the A&M system. And so we are trying to see if there's a pathway forward for that language to remain, and there be 3 parties to that promissory note, including the recipient, the university systems, and the agency, or if that's legislation that needs to be brought forward during the ADA session early on. We don't have the clear path on that yet, but we are working through it, and I wanted to identify it for the committee because it's something that we'll need to work through as we go to final rule proposal later on, either this summer or early fall. Also, I'm not clear if it was intentional, but we do have a limitation for in-state veterinarians. so the language as drafted appears to limit payments to graduates of in-state veterinarians, not students. And then it's the opposite for out-of-state. You can pay an out-of-state student, but not an out-of-state graduate to come and practice. And so that is something that we've identified for the sponsors and the authors of the committee, but we can work well within the framework because there's federal limitations on funding and timing. It actually is going to sync nicely to be looking primarily at Texas licensees for this first award of this contract. So it's something for future and looking at the ADAs, but I don't think it limits us in making the best use of the $1 million that's been awarded to the program in this biennium. So speaking of that funding, it was funded in Senate Bill 8, which was part of the material sent to you last week. And for those of you following online, this is on our meetings page. If you go to the Texas Animal Health Commission's webpage, under meetings at the top, you'll find a link that will provide all the resources that we're using with the committee, and it's in front of them. Senate Bill 8 was provided that one-time federal fund from the coronavirus relief funding, and under that legislation, the funds must be encumbered by November 7, 2023. And so that is a limitation on this program. When we had a kickoff committee, I was given direction to draft a program that had several years, that a veterinarian needs to provide services for multiple years. Up to 5 years was discussed to try to really get that veterinarian to plant roots and grow their business in a community so that they would stay. This limitation would be very different than what was contemplated. That is a state limitation, which is something else that could be addressed during the ADA session. The funds that came under Senate Bill 8 that were allocated to the program under Senate Bill are actually funds from the ARPA funds, that relief program from the federal level. And that has a different timing. So even if Senate Bill 8 did not have a 2023 limitation, we have some time limits imposed by the federal funds. And they're on the screen for you. It must be obligated by 2024, and then expended, which basically means earned, by 2026. So we have some different schedules that we need to look at, and we're paying very close attention to. But for this first award to make the most benefit of it, these are the three timelines that we need to look at as committee members to make sure that we allocate these funds. And when we say obligated, that means the award made. We've selected the candidates. Once they're earned is once they've completed a service year, which is a 12-month period, which we've recommended in the rules. You guys can change that. But what is recommended is a 12-month period in the service community. So long story short, with the federal funding is this may require our initial applicants, even though students are contemplated, but because you have to serve to earn those funds, that our initial applicants would need to be focusing on graduates. So that's my takeaway of the timing limitations and how it may influence the committee decisions for this first set of rules or provisions for this set of funding, because we could draft the rules to be broad and anticipate other funding, but we do need to have a provision making sure that it's limited for these federal funds, the eligibility. So some other moving parts related to the federal funding is beneficiary versus recipients, and this morning at 9:06 I received how fast things are moving with this. Confirmation from the Higher Education Coordinating Board that the governor's office has looked at this program and believes that we may qualify for it, or it may qualify for the beneficiary designation. There's some benefits to that designation, so that was good news for our program. But this is an additional limitation to the program. So by state statute, our limitation is that the student or licensee must serve, I need to say licensee, the licensee must serve in a rural county which is established of a population of 100,000 or less. There's about 40 counties in Texas that are above that 100,000 mark. And so we have quite a few counties that we'll be able to look at for this award under the state program. However, the beneficiary designation, there's only a few categories that would qualify for that federal funding. And one is that the household and populations are residing in a qualified census tract. And so a qualified census tract is defined by federal statute, but it looks at lower income communities where the threshold is, and I have to read this, is a census tract which is designated by the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, and for the recent year for which the census data are available on household income, either 50% or more of the households in the qualified census tract have an income with less than 60% of the area median gross income for such year, or with a poverty rate of at least 25%. The other qualification, so that's a limitation for the federal funds, that the household would need to be a qualified census tract. This is one place where we may be able to look at those rural counties and match them to the qualified census tract to find counties that would meet this threshold. The other is that the household, the applicant would qualify for a Pell Grant. So that's also looking at income issues. We're trying to determine if there's any small business components of that, you know, not that the household has to be in the qualified census tract, but the business is in the qualified census tract. I don't know that that's a pathway forward, but that's something we're examining because we understand that these veterinarians may serve multiple counties and may not live in those counties, but their businesses are primarily benefiting a qualified census tract in a rural county. So that's an additional layer that, at least for this ARPA fund, we need to take into consideration for our eligible applicants. So I'll pause there. That's a lot of information I threw at you to see if there's any questions on that federal fund. Do you have a question, Dr. Graham?
Yeah, I do. I hadn't heard a word say about the number of hours these individuals are gonna work. And, these students, and I'd like to hear y'all tell us how many hours they're gonna work a week, out of seven days a week. My personal opinion is this: if they don't work 7 days a week for a long time, they are gonna end up sharing food with the kids. Because these rural veterinarians have got to be committed to that. And, or if they got two of them in there, they can share the weekends, but they cannot work 40 hours a week and be successful. It's just unheard of. And, we're stressing that very, very big time at West Texas, that they gotta put in some hours and commit themselves for it. And we've gotta be sure to try to keep them, because it's gonna be very embarrassing on this committee around here if they don't. And that's one thing I understand real well.
Thank you, Dr. Graham. And from your comment, I think you may have looked into the rules, because we do have a provision in there that we'll talk about later on
Okay.
agenda about hours, and I'll go into more detail.
I would like to say also that, having some serious banking experiences, known some banking, very big time in a bank. Those loan officers are gonna look at the number of hours that these students are veterinarians, putting in too, because it's very, very important. But we've got to be sure, whether it's woman or male, that they'll work.
I have a question regarding your beneficiary versus recipient. When you're talking about that in regards to evaluating, is that regarding the applicant and how they fit into that, or is that regarding the community and how that is defined within the rural community?
That's a great question. So I'm looking into the community component for small business, but these first two that are listed here would be for the individual. That individual, to be eligible for this award, would need to meet these
For
requirements.
these funds.
For these funds only. And, for the group's awareness, we've drafted provisions that are looking at this, but for all rules, I don't know that it would be my recommendation that we have a residence requirement, in our application, and that's for the committee to decide. But at least for these particular funds, we would need to say the applicant must meet the requirements under 42 USC 802 and the other rules and federal requirements to qualify for the award. Yes, sir.
Just to help me clarify that, so, that last bullet point on qualify for Pell Grant. So the applicant must qualify, or a certain number that qualify for Pell?
For this one, I believe it's limited to the household, like it would go to the applicant's household, is my, I have questions on this one.
I'm a little confused on what is state funding and what is federal funding. You know what I mean? Because I'm guessing that there's different qualifications for each, but there's only one set of funds up there.
Excellent question. There would be significant differences, but we only have federal funding available at this time.
At this time,
At this
okay.
time. Unless there's a community sponsor, which we'll get into later, and that's why I'm spending so much time on the federal funds and the limitations, because that is maybe guiding the initial application process in a different direction than what the committee would have otherwise anticipated.
So what are the, just because I guess I don't know much about it, what are the benefits to having a beneficiary distinction versus a recipient?
Reporting requirements, and my understanding is there may be more eligibility.
Okay.
Mary, do you know if that, I mean, to drill down on that, does that mean that maybe someone who doesn't have to qualify under the Pell Grant or something, a household, could it be that sort of difference, or do you know yet?
I don't know the ins and outs of that yet, but I'll be meeting with our experts from the state level that can provide us more guidance going forward.
If we do get community money that's put into the, that would be a third set of eligibility rules then, because that would potentially be even more flexible.
Absolutely, and we tried to work those into the recommended rules that were sent out. It's a different pot. They would have to meet minimum eligibility requirements, and that's how, as we get further along, you'll see I recommended that here's your basic eligibility requirements. You have to be licensed, you have to be these things, but as we look at this particular source of funding, we may need to drill in to be eligible for ARPA funds, meet the requirements of USC, to be eligible for community funds, meet the requirements of A through D, you know, and that will be completely up to the committee.
Molly, can you...
And the promissory note, they will play a bigger role in the agreement with the vet students. It's completely community-sponsored funding.
Can you tell me a little bit more about ARPA funds so that I fully understand what they are?
Yes, sir. So these are the coronavirus relief
Okay.
funds that were allocated to the state, and for you to have a beneficiary designation, there's a presumptive impact or disproportionately impacted by the public health emergency or its negative impacts for the purpose of providing response under the federal guidelines for coronavirus relief funds.
Okay, it's the acronym that got me confused.
Yes, sir.
there.
Yes, sir.
Got it.
Let me ask you a question. If a group of farmers or ranchers or bankers or whoever in a community that wants to get a lower general veterinarian in there, and they build that individual, veterinary hospital that's very significant, will that have any bearing on the amount of money that this individual can get from this funding?
It would be up to the committee, but I don't believe that would be a limitation, because the purpose of this fund is to provide an incentive to bring that veterinarian into one of these impacted areas and provide a service. And what happens outside of that service, we are going to only be looking at loan debt, and whether or not that exists as part of the, application or the applicant's eligibility. And so what third-party agreements may be made with the community, I don't know that we have to take those into consideration.
And Doc, I think one thing that would help the applicant get the award is if a part of that community, if they were to get $100,000 into this program, that would then flow back to them, then that would give them.
Well, let me ask you this, does that have to, if John Doe out here at Rancho wants to build some facility for him, does that have any effect on what he would get? He just.
Not through this.
An add-on. You know, that was pretty popular one time. I really think that might be popular still.
I was in South Texas recently, in Raymondville in Willacy County, which has not had a veterinarian for some years, and was meeting down there, had a morning meeting with the city council, and had mentioned that one of our students may be going to Raymondville. And the city's economic development director was very interested in that. And in fact, one of our students is going there. How does this tie in with partnerships, for example, more specifically with communities like that, where the community is genuinely interested also in helping somebody to become established? Is that just an add-on, or is that, how does that work?
It just depends. If the community wants to, find those candidates or applicants through this process, and again, a lot of this will be guided by your decisions and directions, there may be an avenue. But it also could be very much independent, that they are trying to recruit candidates on their own, do not want to go through the reporting requirements or conditions of this award, and then on top of it, recommend the candidate to apply for funds. If they're for these particular funds, if you're in a qualified census tract in a rural county, which Willacy County would qualify for, then it could be in addition to the award.
Certainly wouldn't, so local support wouldn't preclude eligibility for this award.
Not as we have it drafted.
Yeah.
In fact, I have a question for the committee coming up. Some programs that I looked at around the nation, or at the Federal Veterinary Medical Loan Repayment Program, limit the award if you're participating in another loan repayment program. And I wasn't comfortable making that decision. I don't know that we want to limit that, or if you want to encourage whatever funds to reduce the debt loan for this individual to make it more appealing for them to stay in those communities. You know.
I think one of the things that the intention of this bill is to have a public-private partnership. So I don't think we would ever want to. Matter of fact, I would be on the opposite side of the phone. If there's a community willing to support what we are saying, this program gives them. That's one of the things we're looking for, is a check mark to say, yes, we would support this student. The other thing I would encourage us to do, if we can identify areas where there is interest and invite them to be a part of this program so that we can get some success stories initiated in these first funds that we administer, that's going to make it a lot easier to get future funding with the state when we can say, we went to Raymondville, they put some money into our pot, we redistributed it, and it's a success story. Now we've got momentum. So to me, I think that really should be our focus as we develop this so that we can get this thing to evolve and grow.
Well, let's say, would they fund one of these good, nice-looking, rural trucks and body, something like that, to start with? Or would it be local funded?
That would be local funded. This is only for, the way it's written, it's only for repayment of loans for student debt.
The Veterinary Medical Loan Repayment Program, the federal program has, is for veterinarians that qualify in a shortage area, but there's another piece of that could be used for equipment and all, and, it's a separate application process and all, but that we've not had a lot of interest in that, but there is some funds available through the federal system for something like that.
That's a perfect transition to the slide that I have up now. One of the pieces of legislation or statutes that were referenced in House Bill 1259 was the Veterinary Medical Loan Repayment Program and the statute that enacted that. And it says as part of the committee's evaluation, you can take in the consideration the areas of the state that have already qualified for that VMLRP designation. There's a few different types of shortage areas designated, but these are the current counties that have been designated by USDA as a VMLRP shortage situation. I will say, looking at the qualified census tract, not all of these fell into that category, so I don't know how much we want to marry our program to these, but this is part of something that was considered by the legislation, and this particular agenda item was looking at the legislation related to House Bill 1259. So just wanted to highlight that for the group, and we can move on to rulemaking plans.
I'll just say a little bit about the federal program, and so we've administered that for a number of years, and so to identify these shortage areas, we just put out feelers basically and have a conference call or two with interested parties. We've had representatives from Texas A&M University, from the diagnostic lab, and from veterinary practice and all, to try to identify where there's a need, where the shortage area is, and a number of areas dropped off this last year that we had identified as shortage areas because there were no candidates, no veterinarians willing to go there. And just basically, if they qualify and are awarded, we have 8 shortage areas that this system allows Texas. We've had about 2 or 3 per year approved, is what the success rate is. But a number of those positions, we didn't have any applicants for. And so, we carried them several years, and then just finally took them off and went with some other areas where we're getting some interest. So it's a little bit counterintuitive, I guess, but we felt like we would have a better success rate if we, put forth shortage areas where we're actually getting applicants, if that makes sense.
Are there some examples, I don't need to go look at all 8, but some examples, Molly, of what type 2 or those kind of things mean, just so that I get some idea as to what they might mean?
Great question. So type 1 shortage is a veterinarian is needed to commit at least 80% of their time to private practice food supply veterinary medicine. Type 2, needed to commit at least 30% of their time to private practice food supply veterinary medicine in a rural area, and they define rural areas remote or economically depressed area. Type 3, needed to commit at least 49% time of their time to public practice settings at the local, state, or federal governmental work, typically in public health, diagnostic laboratory, meat inspection, epidemiology, or other regulatory veterinary needs.
And the different colors up there would, for type 3 being in different colors, would be what? Is that specific counties?
That is, those are
Okay.
the specific counties.
Okay.
So that is the designated area, and it is broader because we realize the practice may, if you're in that area, you'll be serving those communities. Those apply to the county, multiple counties.
Okay.
So it's not all inclusive. I mean, obviously there are more counties that have shortages than what's in color up there, right?
Right.
So,
Those are the ones that we selected
right.
to put forth as the 8 shortage areas, so. But what I'm saying is we had identified veterinarians and others that helped us identify other shortages, especially along the border, those border
Right.
counties along with Mexico, Laredo even, shortage area, places in West Texas that we carried for a number of years and put forth and just didn't get applicants for them. So, and our role is to just facilitate this process, to get the word out that the opportunity is there, and to encourage applicants, and to identify the shortage areas. But the decision on who gets those awards is made by another board. We're not part of that. I think they volunteer veterinarians and other people who sit on that board at the national level and decide who gets those positions.
I think this bill identifies our area
Yes.
very succinctly, which is less than 100,000, and I would hate to make it more complicated than it needs to be, which allows for that influx and outflux depending upon which person wants to go where. So my suggestion would be to not make it that complicated, that the federal government keep it simple and just use that metric, and if somebody comes up, we take a look at them. If nobody comes up, we'll wait until somebody does. That's my opinion.
I I would like to cast a broader net. I mean, this sort of the way, I don't like the way this works, the federal system, so I think, I agree with what you're saying, Dr. Go. I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I guess that was kind of my point, yeah, I think.
And that's a great point, and it may make things less complicated as we go forward. And just by way of comparison, you can see that this is limited to these counties.
How
And
many,
we have potentially 200 counties that could qualify.
how many or do you have any students that's up in where that blue and red and yellow area up in there? You have any students from up in that geographic area in this first class?
Yes.
About how many?
So the light blue,
I can't see the counties.
so Brandel, Potter, Oldham, Hartley, Dallam, those, I believe we have 12 or so.
That helps.
Pretty good. Real good.
You also have a map in your folder, if it's helpful.
Thank you, Sandy.
So, sorry, question. All of it's based on county, so county with a population of less than 100,000?
Yes, so Randall and Potter, Lubbock would be out.
I know, I think you're missing a lot of rural areas.
And this is a statutory limitation. So I know that,
Well, this is why I think it's important, because like for me, I moved to a rural area, but I'm gonna be remotely available to rural areas, but I have to have my family somewhere where, you know, they can have access to things, right?
right,
So I feel like if you can serve some of these counties that have a population of less than 100,000, but don't have to reside there, I don't know, I just think we're gonna miss out on a lot.
So Slayton's in Gaza or Lubbock still?
Lubbock.
Okay, well,
Clayton's in Lubbock, Abernathy's in Lubbock, and the only reason I say this is because I live there, so I can rattle them off, but I feel like there are a lot of places that are very similar to this, like Parker County. I mean, Peaster's in Parker County, but Parker County does not have less than 100,000 people.
Midland County too.
You know, yes, and I think there's a lot of areas that are that way that people are gonna wanna gravitate to where they can commute to a place, to a city.
right.
There's
Go ahead.
There's gonna be two opportunities here. One, feedback from us can get back to those that are gonna form legislation this next session to see what we can alter, right? We're kind of stuck with what the legislation says, so not much we can, then two, I think there is some interpretation for us to look at in terms of what do we define residence and what do we define as business? And wherever we have wiggle room, I think that's where, we're looking at trying to be able to maneuver. So you bring up a great point. It's an oversight in the legislation that maybe we can go back and correct. Trent, I hope you're writing that down. But we're gonna have to try to figure out how can we get creative to navigate, because you're right. I mean,
Right.
I live in New Braunfels. I go all the way to Refugio County, which, you know, there's hardly any population there. So what do we do and how do we navigate?
That's tough to reside in a county of less than 100,000.
So, point of clarification.
I mean,
Great point.
for a
And
lot of us, sorry.
I feel like a sport
Sorry.
stepchild. Live in a county of 45,000, the next county south has 784 people in it.
Yeah. And point of clarification, because I think it's a really solid point, and our state statute is not as limiting as the federal funding. And it says practice in a rural county. State statute does not say resident. And so we have that flagged and recognize that, we need to have flexibility. You know, you take in spousal considerations and where they may be able to be employed to give that veterinarian the flexibility to serve these communities. And just by way of reference, I'm a daughter of a veterinarian that served 8 counties over years of practice. So I get it's a very transient, and we took that into consideration, but we do have limitation with the federal funds being tied to a household. But as soon as we have another source of funding, we did not bring a recommendation to tie it to a, if that helps.
Maybe there's the wiggle room that we're just talking about.
Yeah,
So that's the limitation, just the funding.
right.
So, all right. so VMLRP, the takeaway is this may be more limiting than what we want to take, and we can look at that closer as we go through the rule considerations. So rulemaking plan, that brings us to item 7.
Right, so we're transitioning now to item number 7, the business on the agenda is rulemaking plan. So Mary, you've done a lot of work to put together some rules that are proposals for consideration. It's in your book here.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And, just item 7, and then we'll really dig in item 8, but I just want to discuss what was in the legislation, for rulemaking for the committee. Establishing criteria to determine whether a person is an eligible participant as the commission considers is reasonable. The person's background and interest in rural practice and financial need. Then B, providing for requesting the distribution of money from the account for the programs. That's more administration, what we discussed about. Establishing criteria necessary for community or political subdivision in a rural county to qualify as student sponsors under the Texas Education Code. Governing agreements of financial support sponsor and eligible students. So this is mapping us where we're going to go from some of our earlier conversations. And then establishing other procedures necessary to administer the program. And so that's what was contemplated by the statute, and we took that and in item 8 really dug into some recommendations for the committee. Again, no merit provisions, and if there is something, make those changes.
Okay, so this item is the proposed rules to publish in the Texas Register. So, if Mary, please carry on. Yes.
So, rulemaking process, I want to touch on that quickly. The committee forms their ideas, and we can go several routes with this. But the typical procedure is once we have the rules that are placed, the committee is comfortable with, we post that to the Texas Register, and it goes out for public comment. At the same time, our communications team, who's in the room with us, Callie and Aaron, would distribute that out to interested stakeholders. We have the Texas Authorized Veterinarian Group that would go to. It would go to members like Farm Bureau and others who can get the word out. Obviously, we would also share it with our deans and the members of the committee so that we can get as many applicants for this process as possible, or as many interested individuals commenting on this process as possible. So it goes up for 30 days. It typically works that we're 31 because we typically post and it falls on a Sunday, so we will take comments that come in that Monday after. And then we review those comments, summarize those, share the full comment in our summaries to the committee, and based on those may or make changes as determined by the committee. Then once that is final, assuming there's no substantive changes, you post it back with the Texas Register and it goes into effect 20 days after publication. If there are significant changes to those rules, we may need to repost and solicit more comments on it. And so because this is a new program for our agency, there's also some informal processes that we can take into consideration. And so as we get to the end of this, I'm going to ask for your guidance on how we should proceed. So I want you to think about it as we're going through. Some agencies do informal rule comments, and we do have some timelines we need to be cognizant of, but so that we don't have to go through that 30-day publication, come down, substantial changes, another 30 days of publication, there's something called informal rule comments. And how this would look is the same process except removing the Texas Register. And we post the rules on our website, we send it out to as many interested parties as we can, and provide what I would recommend was a 2-week comment period. If you are interested in this program, if you would be affected by it or benefit from it, please share your information on something that may be relevant so that we didn't have in the original rules. Same process, take those comments 2 weeks after closing, distill it down, summarize it for the committee, make recommendations or take the committee's recommendations based on those comments, and then post for our first official publication in the Texas Register in that 30-day comment period. And so those are two different avenues we could go. We could go with the formal process or an informal, or any variation thereof. But I just want y'all to know that we have options. And it says for proposal in the Texas Register, that the agenda item, but if we are not there yet, we've got other alternatives that we can take, okay? So this is a summary page of what the content and these rules would be located in Title IV of the Texas Administrative Code, Chapter 42, under the Texas Animal Health Commission. That's a chapter that we had open that we could dedicate to this program. So the first few are fairly straightforward: authority and purpose, administration, definitions may need some work based on committee feedback, dissemination of information for the application process, eligibility, application review for initial screening, application evaluation and selection process, denial of an application, rural community sponsors, eligible lender and eligible education loan, amount of repayment assistance. We're really going to dig in that provision, conditions of award, breach of contract, and satisfaction of practice obligations. And I see we are an hour in, and we're really going to start digging in, so I don't know if we want to see if the committee needs a break before we get into this provision.
What are your thoughts? Sure. Break? All right. We're back again on agenda item 8, it's 11:06, and we're resuming the meeting.
Thank you, Dr. Schwartz.
Right.
So we're gonna start with looking at 42.1, and just for way of understanding, we are doing odd numbers, 42.1, 42.3. That's the recommendation when you're starting a new program, so that in the event something is missed or needs to be inserted, we don't have to go back and renumber anything. We could add in those even provisions. So that's the reason you'll see us skipping a number for these rule recommendations. The first few are pretty straightforward. The authority and purpose is 42.1, and this is, I believe, the third category back in your materials, the third tab. So I'm planning to run through these pretty quickly without reading the language. So if you see something or saw something from your review of the materials prior to this, flag it, and we can discuss it in more detail. 42.1, authority and purpose. And 42.3 provides the administration, and the Animal Health Commission administers the program, and then the Higher Education Coordinating Board administers the program account. And speaking with their counsel and other program specialists from the Higher Education Coordinating Board, in the event we get those rules sponsored, we are able to specify accounts so that those funds aren't commingled with the federal funds or any other state funds. And so I just wanted to let the committee know that there is that benefit of account separation in the event we do have a rural community sponsor. 42.5 is definitions, and we're going to look at these as we go throughout, but I really want to flag 42.52. And the reason is we may need to expand this or change this definition as we're going through. And we define it as a person applying for the RVIP who is a recent veterinary college graduate or licensed veterinarian. So this gets us back to that conversation we had about the ARPA funds and the state funds, and we limit it to the recent graduates so we can utilize those funds. But because this is definitions and will stay, we may want to come back and broaden this to account for students when we have funds that would work for enticing someone to come and help them with their student debt with a different pot of money.
Could we just add fourth-year veterinary student?
That'd be great.
That way it encompasses everybody.
So a fourth year veterinary student can apply?
Right, so that when they graduate, they're able to get these funds.
Okay. So the application process is we're guessing maybe sort of a year-ish? You apply 1 year, you're rewarded the next year, or do we know?
That's up to the committee. So for the VMLRP, we typically have spring applicants, for example, that went out in April. My understanding for Texas, and please correct me, Deans, if I'm wrong, the majority of your applicants are going to be May graduates, is that correct? Is there any other structure, because I know with some other post-secondary schools, you do have, December graduates, or is it always going to be May graduates?
Always May, yeah.
Okay, so that helps, and I think that should guide the committee recommendations on when we have our application, request for applicants to go out. The federal funds kind of make this different, but my thought was you do a spring call for applicants, and by the time we are awarding, later, late spring, by the time you're awarding in the fall, you would have some visibility on who is licensed and who isn't, when you're making the award. And my question is, I did a little research, but I don't know if this is absolutely accurate with the Texas Board of Veterinary Medical Examiners. It looks as if a veterinarian can take their exams almost on demand now, and then they get results 7 days after they've taken those exams, or is that not the...
I still believe there's a time in November, December when they take their state boards. The first time they can take it.
Okay.
In the 4th year. Now, just go back, Molly, when would this be announced to students so that I understand when you're saying spring?
We don't know. This is for the committee to decide. If we want to make the most use of these federal funds, if we can fast track a November process, that would give us a full year of November 2022 to November 2023 funds. But that was a little accelerated from what we had originally looked at. But what you're saying, it may actually work with when they can sit for their first.
Can't they do it, take them again in April if they don't pass?
Yeah.
So I guess my question was why, just as a devil's advocate, nobody shoot me. Why do we want to include 4th-year students?
Because if somebody is recruiting a 4th-year student to their location, it may be contingent upon them getting these funds. That may be their decision-making process to go there. I'll go there if I get these funds. And so, for them to be able to take advantage of this program and make that decision, it's got to be far enough back so that they can apply, get awarded, and then say, yes, I'll go there, because these funds allow that to happen. I would hate for somebody to turn a job down in Raymondville because they have to wait a year to get the funds because they can't apply until after they're a DVA.
I think that
Yeah. I mean, I understand, I understand
think
and agree on a certain level, but I also feel like I'm a little on this side of that fence where they need to work for a year and pay back some of their loans that they've taken out.
Well, so part of it might be the definition that we're talking about the applicant now as opposed to the recipient, right?
Yes.
And so this is just eligibility to apply. So it could be that, right? So someone knows that they're going to be awarded, but they're not yet they don't yet receive the funds until certain things happen.
So then I guess the only other downside I could see would be people not passing, people that you choose to award not passing and having to reallocate funds or give it to somebody else, or people that had committed students, I shouldn't say people, students that had committed to a rural community and then upon graduation.
That's going to happen no matter what.
Right.
So you're going to have alternates, just like they do in the selection process. So you're going to have a list.
And you can say that you will get awarded these funds when you are a licensed veterinarian. And if it doesn't have to be that they pass NAVLE in December, it could be that they pass it in April. They just have to be licensed.
And Mary,
Yeah, I just feel like, I was just thinking it might add work, administrative work.
That's a great point, and that was part of the reason, especially with the federal funds, we may be limiting it to our licensed applicants. But the thought is depending on when we do the application process and the award timing, is you could let an applicant be a student, but by the time you enter into a note and award that program, when you make the selection, they would need to be licensed. So that would knock out, so the applicant can be a student, but a recipient, especially under these awards, cannot.
So,
Yes, sir, Dr.
back to my question, Molly, for applicants, new graduates who you'd like to recruit into this program, starting as a new graduate, at what time in their 4 years of study would you be sending out a call for applications? Given that they would be graduating in May, when would you be sending, the reason is, I'll tell you why I'm asking this question. But when would you be sending out the call?
So, the question where you said November, December, so would that be a fourth-year student that can sit for that November, December exam? And then at what point would they be licensed? Once they get their doctorate and they walk across the stage, or is there another component they would have to take after graduating?
Normally they get their license from the state board into May, first part of June.
The reason that I was asking is that at the present time, by September of their senior year, about 70% of our students are pretty well decided where they're going to work. So if you sort of start opening up applications after September of their final year, there's only about 30% of students who are still mulling over where they want to go. So the earlier you could send this out, the better, so that they could have an open mind. And that's the reason I was asking the question. It has nothing to do with licensure. It's simply students start to make up their mind by about halfway through their senior year where they're probably going to be working.
Yeah. We don't want to limit who can go where. We want as many people to go to rural America as possible. So my point would be, let's not try to limit supplies. We can filter that. The committee rules can filter who gets awarded, but let's get appropriate applications and give them enough time.
Is there a way you could apply more advance than a year? I mean, maybe not for the November 2023 deadline, but you know what I mean? Maybe people could apply and you would have a little more time before the decision is made. So I don't know, you could apply in the spring.
And I had originally contemplated a spring application process, but as you noted, the November funds is a little bit of a limitation. But I was looking at a spring application process, but then that makes the award, have you had students that pass the board in November, but then do not graduate? Is it?
Very rare.
Very rare. I think we could write the rules to make that, part, I think we could do that. It would just be that you must be licensed within the jurisdiction at the time of receipt of the award, and then that would cover whatever those licensing requirements are. The problem with that is we don't have a year for these funds, so if you're applying in the spring, making the award within a few months from then we're having to wait to allocate them once the promissory note is signed and they have designated the county that they're going to provide services.
I don't know how you're going to get fourth-year students before they've already made a decision. Do you all have any ideas?
Yep. They become fourth-year students after they complete their exams in May of their third year.
Do we have to have a hard start to the application process? We don't know when we're going to be getting future funds and how they're going to show up. And let's say, for example, we have a community that comes in and says, all right, we're going to give $100,000 for somebody for this position. We wouldn't want to wait till our timeline for the right person to apply. We would want to have an open application process so that as funds show up, people can apply, get those funds, and we award it. I don't think it needs to be like the federal program where we've got this hard stop and start every year, because we don't know where our funds are going to come and when they're not going to come. It makes it a little bit maybe harder administratively to have an open process, but we would be able to, as a committee, say, okay, we have an application, we have funds, y'all need to consider it, go. Instead of this hard line, in November of every year, we're gonna accept applications for 60 days, and it's either you get it or you don't. It doesn't allow for a lot of wiggle room for appropriate.
That would be nice. I just wonder, is that hard to plan, as a student getting funds? Is that hard to put into action? Not really?
As a committee, I wonder how hard that would be, because we have, how much funding is gonna be available, how much is that award gonna be?
Or you could have a cadence, but just understand that if, you can apply at any time, if something comes up. I would just want some flexibility.
I like that approach. It's just.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Well, we're talking about students and graduates. What if somebody's been out of school for 3 years and decides he wants to move to Muleshoe, you know? Do we not consider them?
No, we do.
Of course we do, you know, so an open process makes it a lot simpler.
For sure.
Is that, Mary, wasn't there somewhere in the bill or something that said they had to have graduated within 4 years? Yeah.
That is our limitation.
Oh, that's fine.
For
Okay.
right now. And I believe we could handle it as an open process. You're right, the administration of that and trying to encourage applications that in a timely process might be a challenge. But we could work with that. The other option to write into the rules is the applications must be received as provided by the commission in the RFA, the request for applications. So then it's not set in stone by rule, but it's determined by the committee as needed. That might be an alternative to get some flexibility. And we as a committee, or you as a committee, excuse me, have a timeline, kind of a guidance based on trying to recruit or get this planet with those third-year students, fourth-year students, and the goal to award at a certain time, but then have the flexibility to call it together. And we'll talk about some flexibilities to maybe allow us to do more meetings on short notice at the end of this. So that's a great suggestion, just especially knowing the limitations with these funds. As fast as we can get an application, we shouldn't have to wait because the rule says 2 months later.
And Mary, to carry that forward, what you were saying, before this meeting, we were talking about, you were saying that rather, it might be where they have the expense, or they've worked the year and then they get the money, rather than get the money and work a year in case they default, let's leave or something like that, where we don't have to go and try to collect the funds that were dispersed.
Yes, that would be ideal, but I'm limited by the language the Higher Education Coordinating Board has put, because the language that's in the bill says a lump sum payment. And so, unlike some of the other grant programs we looked at, the bill structure anticipates these students getting their award and then a promissory note, and then the agreement in that promissory note, you owe, right now it's set up with the university system. You owe university system $120,000. After your first year of service, you owe university system $100,000. And so the structure of the bill doesn't allow us to earn it and then be paid, especially for the federal funds. However, there is some consideration that we've talked about on that, but one of the interesting positions as to why it may have been structured this way is because that student lender gets paid immediately, whatever the committee decides the award is, which helps with the interest and helps with the cost of that note. And so that it may have been intentional that it was drafted that way.
And the federal funds can be used for debt retirement or existing debt retirement?
It cannot. It can be used as an incentive to serve these areas that were heavily impacted by the disaster. And so it is an incentive to bring a service to that community, not loan repayment.
So I'm confused. You were just talking about loan promissory notes and all, but it can't be used to pay for loans.
But the purpose is to incentivize the students. The effect is debt reduction.
The coordinating board can distribute the money direct to the loaner, right?
Yes. Yes.
With the federal funds?
Yes, those funds, excuse me, I have water.
That, even though they're paying the loan, whoever holds that note, right? They're paying them, that's not considered debt repayment, that's an incentive, and the effect is debt repayment. Okay.
Glad you understand.
That is
You
my
give me too much
understanding
credit.
at this time.
Okay.
So it is the service that we're focused on, bringing that service to these impacted communities.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so as far as the definition for number 2.
Sorry. No, I was gonna jump to another question on the definition. You're still talking on number 2.
So quickly on number 2, is it the committee's recommendation that we add in our 4th-year veterinary student? And is that clear enough for all vet schools? That's the practice, it's a 4-year program then?
Yep.
Okay,
I think so.
thank you. All right.
You've got a definition for recipient. Do you need a definition for beneficiary or is that just if we're restricted to ARPA and we have to be a beneficiary, not a recipient, do we need to define that?
My thought was going to be is when we get to eligibility,
Yes.
that is a criteria in that, and define it in that particular provision, because the intent is that in 4 years, in 2026, we won't be married to that beneficiary designation, so then I won't have to renumber my definition, our definitions at that time. So, were there, in looking through the other definitions, is there any comment on what was provided in the rules? So, what we have drafted now for eligibility, and I'll run through, I'll show you quickly. This is what we have drafted, but then we'll also have other considerations. So if you're thinking we left something off, let's save that to the 3rd slide, and we can jump in there, and we can quickly just see what's provided in the language currently, and see where we need to change or add at the end. If you do not like a particular provision that's included in these first 2 slides, flag it so that we talk about it when we get to those other considerations. So to be eligible to apply for the RVIP, an applicant must, so here, complete an application by the deadline established by the TAHC. And so that is the RFA process that I mentioned, that we could leave that loose, and then when we send it out, that establishes the deadline. Be a U.S. citizen or a legal permanent resident, not be currently fulfilling another obligation to provide veterinary medical services as part of a scholarship agreement, an educational loan agreement, or another educational loan repayment agreement. So this is one to flag, and what we need to discuss. This is a component that you see quite a bit when you look at other programs, and I believe, I don't know the justification, but it may just be administratively making sure that the loan exists at the time the Higher Education Coordinating Board is having to make that payment. That may be why they don't want to have those conflicting loans, but I'm not married to that provision. This is a statutory requirement, number 4, that you have received a loan from an educational loan provider for 50% of the funds for tuition and fees for 1 or more academic years while enrolled in one of the colleges. So we don't have to have a massive loan debt for these individuals to qualify. They just have to have 50% of their tuitions and fees for 1 year to meet the qualifications, and that's going to make sense when we get to the award amount recommendations that you see later on.
Is that 50% or more, right?
Yes. Yes,
Should it say or more there? It just says very prescriptively 50%.
I can add that provision. I was pulling from the statute. So at the time of the initial application, be a recent, and we may need to tweak this, be a recent graduate of an accredited college of veterinary medicine in the state of Texas who is eligible to take the exam for board certification. So this doesn't work from what you all had explained to me moments ago. So we will come back to A.
And then
We do need to come back to that because the term board certification is not the same as licensure. They could be very confusing.
And I believe you have in your materials, my slide didn't capture the changes to this. So let's work on this. I said we'll come back to it, but I see the fault in it. Be a recent graduate, so we need to say be a fourth-year student.
Or recent
Student. Or recent graduate of an accredited college. And then we just take out the board certification altogether. Does that work? So how,
I think that's fine, I would just change it,
to license?
take the exam of the Texas State Board Veterinary Medical Exam licensure.
Could you repeat that?
Who is eligible to take the exam from the Texas State Board of Veterinary Medical Examiners. And then the B, we'd have to make the same adjustment.
Board certification, Molly, typically you think about with regard to somebody advanced training for specialization.
And that language is in the bill, so that would need to be worked, maybe
We'll need to
revised or something.
look at that.
In under B, from a high school or general academic teaching institution, that's in Texas, right? Those high school or the general academic institution.
Yes, so I believe it was put in the materials, your printouts here, that it had it located in Texas.
Okay.
Both of them are located in Texas, and when I copied and pasted, it didn't bring my edits from the document. And then I struck, be a licensed veterinarian with no restrictions, because we're looking at applications at this point. All right, so quickly, complete an application by the deadline established by THC. Is the committee comfortable with that being something fluid that the commission determines based on basically applicants and when they're received?
So you could just say complete an application to the THC or something like that, and not have a time frame on it? Is that what the wish of the committee is?
I would at this very early stage, because we don't know when we're gonna get the monies, and pigeonhole preventing an opportunity for somebody if we should come in as money.
U.S. citizen. Number 3, not fulfilling an obligation to provide veterinary medical services as part of a scholarship agreement. So I could see the veterinary medical loan repayment program, those 8 designated areas where someone's receiving their $25,000 a year under that program. Does this committee consider that something that would disqualify you from eligibility? Is there any?
No.
No, okay, that will, I'm striking through that, and I'm hoping Sandy is also striking through that, so that we,
That's number 3, we're gonna strike it.
we're gonna strike 3. So number 5A, at the time of the initial application, has been revised.
I'm sorry, did you do number 4, 50% or more?
Yes, so I have that 50% or more added there. Moving down to 5A. At the time of initial application, be a 4th-year student or a recent graduate of an accredited college of veterinary medicine in the state of Texas who is eligible to take the exam from the Texas State Board of Veterinary Medical Examiners. Board of Veterinary Medical Examiners. B, be a student of an out-of-state accredited college who graduated from a high school located in Texas or a general academic teaching institution located in Texas. And then C,
Why would it be just a student? Why wouldn't it be the?
I was gonna say that too. This is the statutory limitation that we had referenced earlier in House Bill 1259, where I don't know if it was intentional, but that out-of-state have, it's different than our.
We'll need to maybe see about getting that changed.
And Trent just raised his hand, I think he has it. So other considerations, and this is just a list that we've come up with. If it needs to be more, please, this is open conversation. Is there a requirement to secure an offer of employment or establish or maintain a practice in a rural county within a certain time period as specified in the agreement? Do we need to put that into the rule? And would y'all know the time period that y'all would need to identify that? So thinking about these third-year vet students that are now fourth-year students, to qualify as part of the application process, do we want them identifying where they are going to practice or where they have an offer of employment, or is that too structured at this point when we're trying to recruit candidates? And these are provisions that I looked at either from the Veterinary Medical Loan Repayment Program or other programs across the nation. So it's I don't know about the application. I think that there needs to be some stated intent, but I don't know that they actually need, I don't know.
I don't think we have to require it.
No.
Yeah,
But to receive the funds.
Yeah.
so they'll have to enter into a promissory note, and we can have that specified in the agreement of where they have to provide service.
I don't know if it would be wise to talk about that in the application. I don't know, because I feel like the way it's written now, anybody going anywhere could technically apply.
Would almost
Right.
scare people off to think you've got to commit that early, to have
Right,
some kind of
okay.
commitment that early.
Okay. And we could have the rural county, you know, you have to be a rural county, and for the ARPA funds have additional requirements, just as notifications. But at the time of award, that's when they're really going to need the designation.
And you have to say serve a rural county, doesn't mean it's
For the program, but ARPA funds.
ARPA's different.
Sorry, I'm gonna keep making that distinction all the way through.
But we're trying to write broad rules for the program.
Another common element, but not one that I have any opinion on, is debt threshold. The only debt threshold we are limited to by statute is the 50% for tuition and fees for 1 year, 50% or more. It is not, I don't know what that looks like. So, do we want to have a threshold, or is that counterintuitive to the purpose? If there's any debt, do you want to consider that?
I think it's counterintuitive. This is not a loan repayment program. This is an incentive program. And if somebody has $80,000 of debt and we reward them $180,000 of funds, that first 80 can go and pay that off, but the other 100, if it can be awarded to them, can be used for infrastructure and getting their stuff going. Or is that not able?
I don't think that's permitted under statute. It would be for the tuition and fees for the student. But there's nothing that says this has to be a $180,000 award. You know,
I think it's important to keep included people that only have $10,000 of debt. You know what I mean?
Right, I do.
I think it's important, because I think as a committee, we will be able to serve more people if we can capture some of the smaller debts as well.
You don't want to penalize them because they were smart and didn't borrow the money.
Right, for sure.
So maybe in there, we can put a cap, we'll only give up to so much, and we can establish that later, or less, whatever there is.
We'll dive into this quite a bit in 42.21, for amount of repayment assistance, and how we try to address those smaller loans is a percentage of your loan. You know, after your first year of service, you get 10%. And
So that may be the mechanism to make sure, or that was what we had thought of in trying to make sure we didn't, narrow the field. So I'm writing no next to debt threshold, no limitation other than what's required by statute. Last semester students, and it sounds like we've already covered this by our fourth year students. So that is something we're working into the rules and the changes we just made in previous, provisions.
Could you, just, and I know you've looked at the act many times, but and I don't need you to do it now, but if you could look just to make sure that it is limited to the amount of debt. So based on what Stephen talked about, so if is it an incentive program or it only repays up to the amount of their educational loan? Up to a certain point. And I would ask that we don't write in that we're just covering the tuition and fee loans, because for vet school, you can borrow up to the cost of attendance, which includes living and textbooks and other items, which makes up a large percentage of that, maybe. And that's fine, but people often borrow beyond the tuition and fees so they can live.
But that's just to qualify.
Yep.
That's not, that's all the money could be used for. It says you must have borrowed money for tuition and fees, but it doesn't limit to that as the only money that could be paid back. There could be other loans that they could utilize that for, because it's not stipulated in the bill that that's the only funds we could repay.
So are the funds only for student debt, all-encompassing student debt?
But that's what
That's the question.
That's the question,
Yeah.
okay.
So I'll look into it to see if there's a way to read that broader. What I was looking at, the financial support received by an eligible participant must be used to retire student loan debt or to pay tuition and fees to the university system while the eligible participant is enrolled in a college. So that's talking about your student applicants, which we're kind of beyond. So I'll look to see if there's a pathway that we can do more, as long as it's with a lender, you know, one of those recognized loans, not a type of private award from family or those things. There might be something that we can expand that to. So that's a great point to not read it as narrowly, but I'll look at the statute and make sure we comply. I haven't read it broader, because each time they talk about it is tuition and fees, but I'll look into it. So.
And that sets the minimum.
Yeah.
Right.
So, comply with state regulations for appropriate licensure. So this is what we had talked about is, you know, for that application, and then the recipient component is adding a provision that at the time of award, they must be meeting licensure requirements for the jurisdiction. So that's something that we could, may not be for the application eligibility, is what I'm saying, is we might need to have it in another program, portion of the rule for the recipient. So we can, unless y'all want it as part of the applicant process, we can say no to this one. So same thing for these next few. Some of these programs were designed around licensed candidates. National accreditation of the Veterinary Medical Loan Repayment Program. You already have a veterinarian. For us, that would be the equivalent of state authorization that says you're meeting the requirements of the state to practice with large animals and the programs that are state and federal cooperative. Those two, or those three, I think could be lumped together for a conversation on the recipient. Once you are awarded this, you need to be accredited with USDA Type 2 accreditation, because that means they're more likely to work on small, large animal, food supplying animals. Same thing with state authorization. Don't think it's for our application process eligibility.
this next to last one, I will need to plug into the eligibility requirements for the federal funding. So, must be eligible to apply for federal funds as required by 42 USC 802 and the Code of Federal Regulations that control that. So that's something we will be limited to providing. I want to have that as the very last item for the rule proposal, so that when that becomes obsolete, we just go in and strike it, and it won't affect our numbering for the rest of the eligibility requirements. Other committee RVIP recommendations that weren't covered or discussed, to say a vet student or recent graduate needs to meet to apply for this award, or anything we didn't think of.
We're talking about application process.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things in evaluating folks, do we need to put in there that they need to provide references?
Yes,
Is that in there?
we have that discussed later for the consideration for the committee. So I have that in 4213 for us to discuss for application, evaluation, and selection process. So the goal for eligibility is it's broad, get as many eligible candidates as you can be, and basically this is what's going to exclude you. And then when we get to the selection process, that's where the committee says what is required to be considered and awarded. So we'll get to that. If you think of anything, we can revisit this back towards the end. We'll keep moving for time. Application review for initial screening. So the Animal Health Commission staff would pre-screen the candidates for eligibility and completeness. This goes to comments about, do we have to marry them? Do we want to limit, originally as drafted, we said they must include the rural county or counties in which the applicant is practicing or intends to practice veterinary medicine within how long of receiving the award. So it doesn't tie to the application process, but it ties to the award process. And then we, as the commission, would verify that the location qualifies under the program, so rural county generally, and then qualified census tract or whatever the other requirement would be for the federal funds. Do we need to, is the committee comfortable with this language, looking at the award?
A, B, and C, or?
But just focusing on B, A and B. If you have an issue with A, we can revisit that. B.
So it's, the question is related to practice within how long of receipt of award money, or should it be that they have to be doing that to receive the money?
For the committee.
I think there needs to be at least 6 months or something. There's got to be something there before they, that's normally the amount of time it takes when they graduate before they have to make their first student loan payment is 6 months. They graduate in May, I think their first payment is September, October, something like that.
A lot of
We can do something different.
But I don't know, for a year.
I know the last new grad I hired, he had to make his first payment October 1. That was
Yeah.
pre-COVID.
So who knows?
I think we all,
For this, I'm not looking at the payment. I'm looking at you are a recipient.
So this is not
So it's their
money.
intention.
Okay.
It's their intention. So you have been selected. We didn't require you to put where you are practicing in the application. We didn't want to make them marry to that decision. But now you've been selected, where will you provide services?
I think John's comment earlier that by September, before graduation, many of them are already committed. So at that stage, for a student, you're almost looking at 10 months, 8 months. But this, again, different than receiving money.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, for B, you're including instances where someone has already graduated and is 3 years out, for example, working in an eligible county. They can apply at that time, right? Not as well, and, okay, for the remainder of their student loans.
And that may be, as drafting, thinking about the funds available, I was more geared to that recipient in this, that it needs to be a pre-booked. But the student applications don't have to include, I'm confused, don't have to include where they're practicing?
Well, you guys, I believe the guidance was to not include that in the application.
Right.
But then, once your application is selected, before you can to qualify for the award, we need to know where you're going. And make sure that that's going to meet.
Well, then, at the time of awarding, we need to know. So, maybe the language should read, at the time of an award, you must have provided us where you're going. Because we're not gonna award somebody and then say, okay, where are you going? We're gonna wanna know.
But as far as applications go, they don't have to do that.
Correct.
No, I'm just trying to
Right.
figure out when the timing would be that you would get that notice. It's almost then gonna be like a pre-award. We've selected you, now we need to know if you can you actually qualify because of where you're planning to practice.
I think there's, B is fine for graduates. You might need a section under there for fourth-year students.
Okay. For our graduates,
Is there a period when you develop the promissory note that you can have a second round of communication with the committee, maybe? I don't know when you would declare.
I know, that's when we took it out of the application process.
I think we have to declare when we make the award. I think it gets too muddy otherwise.
And then how do we receive the information? Maybe in their application, they provide tentative.
Well, that's why I was thinking maybe what is your intent on the application?
Yeah, and
That way,
it was drafted as if they were going to be declaring where they would practice in their application, because we would take that into consideration as part of the selection process.
Maybe we need to.
In California.
even if they don't put a location, what type of practice do you intend to go into?
So she says to pre-select, so we could use that terminology to pre-select, I guess. Then you can list the rural area that they intend on practicing, just so we know that they qualify for this program for the initial, it is just an initial screening. It doesn't mean that they have to, but just so we can keep them moving along the process and present those applications to you all.
I like it.
The pre-select candidates at some stage, those come to you all, and as part of it, they're notified of their pre-selection and must declare where they would practice.
Do you have a two-stage selection process, kind of?
Well, this is just initial screening. We don't even define who does the initial screening.
And this, the commission does initial.
Y'all would do that.
Yeah, so it's pre-selection, but then.
I think that you gotta have what their intent is. We're gonna go to, maybe they list, I've got these three choices. What are your options that you're presenting to them? That's gotta be in there.
For the application?
I think we've gotta go back and fix that.
Yeah, and the reason, I'd like it to be open-ended, but otherwise you don't know. They may think they qualify and they selected a county that's 102,000.
Maybe jumping the gun with this question, but when we review applications, has the state officially identified any underserved counties as more critically affected than others, or not? Or do we just look at all counties that are underserved in this manner, equally?
The statute doesn't identify it.
Doesn't, no.
No,
You know, if the committee would want that, we could be more restrictive, but it was more broad.
Not unless there's guidance already, that there are some more critically affected areas.
Just less than 100,000.
Yeah, that's all it is, right? I mean, that's it.
To think on that a little bit, less than 100,000, is it just one county in the practice area need to qualify, or does the whole practice area need to be?
Not defined, and I think the reason why it's not defined in there is because the intent of the bill is to keep it broad. Because again, we want money from public partnerships, so we don't want to pigeonhole it too tight in just one practice area or one type. There's a reason why there's been given a lot of flexibility in this, the way it's written.
Well, that's something I need to understand. If we're screening these applicants and somebody who is working part of Bexar County and some other counties, do they, San Antonio, do they qualify?
If they're practicing significantly in an adjacent county and rural, I would think they would qualify.
So for the federal funds, they have to reside in it, correct?
The household, yeah.
So,
Getting clarification.
but for anything else that we get, we can decide, right, how we,
So, for instance, you don't qualify
right,
as an hypothetical example, but if you provide services to Gaza County,
right?
and it's a significant amount, then that may open up eligibility, the practice area. Is that right?
Correct.
Is a significant amount defined anywhere?
Or you can move the post. It isn't, and I would rather let this committee make those determinations as they come up. I would love to have that flexibility instead of this hardline bureaucratic line that says, this is all we're doing. And then you've got areas of need that could be funded that we can't touch.
I agree.
And I didn't provide that recommendation, the only guidance I got was from the VMLRP, where 80% is served or 30%, and maybe as part of the application process, declare their intent, counties they'll serve, and the percentage of service provided to that county. Because if someone's given 10% to the rural community, that may not pass with the committee.
And there's gonna be instances where you have a practice that's a mixed practice, and there may be one individual in that practice where they spend 90% of their time in neighboring practices in the rural areas. We don't want to qualify the practice, we want to qualify the individual at that practice. And I can think of one practice in particular in Dripping Springs where, that county isn't gonna qualify, but there's a doctor in that county, in that practice, that travels all over Blanco County servicing rural communities, and he's the only one that does it. He would qualify.
So, on this provision, I like the recommendation to make a separate provision for your students versus your graduates. To close this out, is it unreasonable, so if we're talking about graduates, that once you are selected, they've given us their intent, but it could have changed, that they tell us exactly where they are going to be practicing within 30 days, 60, what is our?
Yeah, we need to know what they're doing.
Yeah, so within 30 days, I think is reasonable. And then, looking at Sandy to draft a recommendation, we'll drop in a C, for applicants, for student graduates must identify their intent or something to that effect. And it may be that we need to go back into the application and not have it as part of this review screening.
So Mary, you looking,
So we're still on, we're doing B, we're in B.
okay.
B, and so we'll need to draft a C, and then D will turn into D, for our student applicants. Applications. I think it could be similar for your students, evaluating just so that they let us know where they're going. Especially with those short funds.
Well, in the short funds, they're not eligible.
This may be a little silly, but should we say Texas counties?
Let me look at our definition. I think we may already have it.
so number 12, rural county, a county in the state of Texas with a population of 100,000.
Right, so that covers it.
So Mary, when we get to a stopping point, we have lunch, maybe we can,
Let's get through D if that works, and then
Yeah.
So we're gonna leave, must include rural county or counties in which the applicant is practicing or intends to practice on the application, correct? Yeah. And then we need I guess another sentence that says that they have to confirm their whatever within 30 days of being rewarded, receiving the award.
Yes, that's my takeaway from the discussion.
I think I can go with that.
And I know that may require folks to really marry themselves to a plan earlier than you, but if we're trying to recruit folks, maybe that's a benefit too. They know, so.
Well, and I think on your application, you can make it seem a little more broad. You know, like, what is your intent, or what type of practice do you intend on going to, or what have you. That way, on your pre-selection period, you can kind of narrow it down.
So D is a catch-all, and for the rural community sponsors, please know, we really don't have a framework to look to. So this is what, with the input of Trent and others, we've tried to establish that. And so it's almost as if these rural community sponsors have a different system. You know, if a community has identified a candidate that would work in their candidate and they think they want to recruit, we're gonna be looking at them for eligibility, under the program. And then they'll enter into a sponsorship agreement, that would not be scored or ranked necessarily by the committee, because it is these communities that are entering into the agreement directly with the students. So they can specify in their own agreement what must or must not be met. We're just looking to make sure 50% tuition and fees within the 4 years of being licensed, the minimum requirements that are required by the statute to be part of this program.
What's the incentive for a community to, let's say they're gonna send $100,000 to the coordinating board for the recipient to receive 97,000 back? What's the incentive for them to do it that way as opposed to make an agreement directly with the?
It's a great question, I do not know. Other than maybe they find applicants that they wouldn't otherwise.
Yeah, if they have somebody, that wouldn't make any sense, but if they're looking for somebody,
Okay.
then that
Be
would,
the only reason.
you could bring them that.
Okay, I
That's
see,
that,
yep.
so that's the only benefit
Okay.
that I've seen through that route. All right, if there's no questions or changes to what is now D, we can take the graph.
okay, if we're all ready, we'll reconvene. Just for the record, all the members who were present earlier are together again after the lunch break. I'm showing 12:30 p.m. So we'll resume discussion and pick up at 42.13.
Thanks, Dr. Schwartz. So this gets to the application evaluation. The first two components are not getting into the nuts and bolts, but what the committee is on the selection process. Right now, it's drafted that the committee members will be responsible for selecting the program recipients. And B, the committee may invite advisors from the outside that needs to say agency to evaluate eligible, or needs to say committee to evaluate eligible applications if needed. Advisors outside the committee will not receive compensation or reimbursement for expenses
Just for awareness, the committee members also do not receive compensation or expenses, so we appreciate your service. And then this is completely up to the committee. Like I said, looking at other programs, they have these advisors, these panels that select the committees. If you guys want to go there, or if you want to be part of making those final reviews of that eligible applicant, this could be something we consider later on. But it's entirely up to the committee about that next level of review. Also, some of the programs said that a current or potential applicant may not serve as an advisor on the committee. It needs to say like the panel, and that would be obvious for conflict reasons, but we did not limit that to past applicants, or past awardees, because there may be some value to have those folks come and give us input on it. So thoughts on the committee process selection and who should be making those determinations now, and what are thoughts? So additional conversation. Thank you, Dr. Villa. On this, we'll move to C, and this is where we're really going to dive in. Have a rural community sponsor will be scored based on the evaluation criteria, which may include, but is not limited to, the following information provided on the application. So just like we saw earlier, this is what we're bringing to the table and is currently in the rules, but we'll also have these other considerations for us to jump into after. But just for time's sake, if you see an issue with what's drafted or think it doesn't quite capture where we need to go, let's just address it while we're talking about it. So for first criteria or evaluation, background and interest provided in a personal statement. Assuming the individual is going to be providing a personal statement, I want to make sure the committee would support that initiative.
Yep, good.
So then second, involvement in professional or educational activities relating to livestock and poultry veterinary care services. That's a term we looked at. We could expand that to food animals. It's wide open there, but that was just
I would suggest just using the term rural veterinary care services. It encompasses everything, because, to be honest, your rural veterinary practices do everything. They're not limited to just livestock or poultry.
And that was rural veterinary care services?
Yes, ma'am.
Just rural veterinary practice. So either way, but rural is the key.
For my clarification, this isn't necessarily geared toward a food animal veterinarian, right? It's just veterinarians in the rural practice.
Right.
And it's slightly different than our VMLRP.
Right.
So, the same thing on number 3, relevant work or volunteer experience relating to rural veterinary care services or practice.
Volunteer, what is that? Why is that worded?
It was just something that could be considered. Someone may not have taken a job, but they had a commitment to going in and cleaning kennels at a rural clinic. I don't know. It was trying to make it as broad. We could limit it to relevant work or experience and not make it on a volunteer basis.
Well, and does it have to be experience relating to veterinary services? I mean, can it be like 4-H stuff, or?
Absolutely.
I don't know.
Building fence?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
It doesn't. This is completely for the committees, what you think would be most useful in trying to find an applicant that will meet the purpose of this legislation.
Number 2 encompasses 4-H or FFA, because it's educational activities relating to rural veterinary services. I guess that's maybe why you had livestock in there.
Right.
The reason I had livestock in there is because other programs had small and large, so it just said large, and so to be more geared toward rural, so I put livestock and poultry, but I think rural keeps it simple and it's more. so just ignore the livestock.
I think that's relevant, because if there's a rural community that is short a veterinarian, that means that they're short a dog veterinarian, livestock, and equine, veterinarian to provide all types of services.
Thank you.
And I love number 4. Number 4 encompasses everything else.
Oh, yeah.
So, involvement in educational personal activities of a rural nature, so
That got everything.
I got building fence in there.
Yeah.
yes.
And lots of other activities.
So, just going back to number 4, and going back to my story about Raymondville, when I met with the school superintendent down there and some of their faculty, one of the problems that they're having is many young people interested in the veterinary science aspects in high school, but nowhere to go and get their practicums.
Exactly right.
And so the opportunity for someone like this to be able to facilitate a pipeline of young people who are interested in getting the necessary experiences, I think would be a very important responsibility. I don't know whether that can be fleshed out anymore, but there's this sort of chicken and the egg thing that was happening in South Texas. Lots of young people interested, nowhere to go to get the practical experiences for them to have the next step in their interests in veterinary medicine. And so it's vaguely in there, but a very important part of trying to mitigate this problem in the future by making sure there's a pipeline opportunities for these young people.
Do you think it's vaguely in 4 or more in 3 and 2?
It may be prescriptive, but it might be prescriptive, but, you know, the willingness to provide opportunities for young people, I'm trying to think of something that might be in there that would be in there. Maybe it's too prescriptive to go in there, but it's important.
So number 5 was pulled from some other programs. It goes to if you're disqualified from other state loan forgiveness programs, if that's disclosed in the application process, you all could consider it. Let's say if somebody's defaulted or has an issue with a loan, that might be important for us to know where we're getting the best value in our recipients. So that's one we dropped in from other programs that we see. 6 is demonstrated financial need. And then 7 will need revision based on what we discussed. This was provided for in the statute, but we're not going to limit the veterinary shortage area, but should it even be a consideration?
I don't think they should get ranked higher than another applicant because of it, personally.
Okay. And then I would be okay removing it if the committee is altogether. It could be a consideration, but it wouldn't be controlling. And Dr. Boyles, did you?
Since it's in the bill, do we not have to have it in,
No, it was precatory language, if I recall. I need to look back at that we may consider. It wasn't shall consider.
I mean, as long as they're in a rural county, I think that's good. So I'm okay to remove it.
Okay, so as of right now, I'm lining 37, and we'll move to other considerations, and this is not an exhaustive list, so let's exhaust all of our thoughts on this. So, major or emphasis area during formal post-secondary training, during their bachelor's degree, major or minor, with an animal husbandry, animal science, those type of emphasis. Would the committee consider those in looking at whether or not this individual would meet the goals of the legislation or the program?
I mean, I know some veterinarians that have degrees in chemical engineering. You know, I don't know if that is important or not.
I don't think the first bullet point.
I think if they went to vet school, they got there, so.
Okay, so then,
I think the second one's pretty important.
Yeah.
Specialty training area or discipline, I don't know if that would have come out through the vet program.
Can you describe the second bullet point?
Well, for those that track, obviously, I think somebody that's on a track that allows them more rural experience in their training that will then carry over into their career is pretty important versus somebody who's tracking small animal
If
only.
we don't have tracking system.
Okay, but you do have exposure in your entire program, that's what you're geared towards, so yeah, you would qualify. We wouldn't be specific about what that is, but it just says major or emphasis area during the training of a DVM degree. I think that's important. Your entire program provides that.
So, we're gonna strike through number 1. Number 2 is major or emphasis area during formal training for DVM degree. Specialty training area or discipline, I don't know if there's a distinction, between 2 and 3, and if not, we could mark through
I think of specialty, I think of board certification.
board certification. And what I was understanding is in that last rotation, there's opportunities to become nationally accredited, those types of things, and whether or not we wanna take that into consideration.
I don't
It
think
would-
we need.
It would be covered in 2.
You know, back to 2, you know, maybe appropriate emphasis areas would be what, you know, Stephen was talking about. I can think of our small animal track people are not gonna be prepared to do this, and yet our mixed track people, so just having appropriate emphasis areas, I think would be the best way to describe that.
I'd keep it broadly defined.
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah, because again, you've got, I looked at a ball python in Hudspeth County, east of El Paso, up on a ranch. I mean, it makes no sense, but they had a sick snake. Instead of shooting it, they wanted somebody to look at it. So, maybe that's to the extreme, but to your point, it's about rural practice, and, you know, every household's got a dog.
I think you would define maybe your program, whereas their program tracks, I think yours is gonna be defined maybe by the externships they choose. Because isn't there gonna be some leeway on choice of where they go their 4th year?
Yeah, to some degree, but the whole program is geared around general veterinary practice in rural and regional communities, right? Everyone graduates with that same,
Right,
so I think the whole program is tracked to them
right.
as a more narrower mission school than others.
I believe it may be more appropriate just to say appropriate emphasis areas versus major. You know, I don't know that major.
Yeah, I think Dr. August's explanation was pretty broad, pretty good,
Yeah.
you know? I liked that.
Do you wanna take into consideration non-degree, non-board certification training or certification?
Is that like USDA?
That's one of them that I believe would count, the USDA accreditation.
So if for a student, they don't do the training, they don't get the USDA certification until after graduation, right? Or,
We did it during school, didn't we?
you did the training, but I don't think you get,
You don't get certified till you're a graduate veterinarian in regulatory work.
yeah.
That could be one.
Now, if somebody may have had a previous career, though. Build into it.
That would be broader than accreditation. It would allow the board to look at any certification.
Training, yeah, okay.
So we had, the personal statement, and this was for me to make sure I didn't skip over, and make sure the committee supported a personal statement to be included in the application process, so we'll check that one. Next is awards. Would y'all wanna look at any particular award the applicant received? It's very open-ended, but it would allow you to look at anything that they've excelled in that could be relevant to.
Yeah, awards are achievements, you know, something that they've done.
Do you want letters of recommendation?
That goes along with that reference.
This is a catch-all in case we miss something in the rule, that if we're going through the application process, you could put additional criteria in the application itself, for them to be on. That we wouldn't be limited to that republication and the time it would take if we get through this and say, we really need to know something that was done there. So it's an avenue to make sure that we can put that in the application.
Is there anywhere in here where somebody's being asked to provide their bio with awards and normally with what we do? I didn't see it on this list, but is that part of the application template?
I had assumed it would be part of the application process, that we could have CV, biography, what we could make it as part of the rules as well. If that, would the committee want to ensure that's part of every packet? I think I would put that as number one, you know, from biography, from the vet schools, what's the appropriate term there? Like, are we talking resume, are we talking CV, are we talking
Or CV, yeah.
statement of experience?
Yeah, I think most of the people in practice would be more familiar with resume or biographical. I think in academic world, we talk CVs a lot more.
I just think as long as a consistent document is in there, I think, and whatever we want to title it, I think is fine.
I'll tell you, from looking at applications on my end, I like it when it's provided in a resume form versus just lots of letters, you know, so if there's some structure to it, but we can look at that.
It also would be helpful if you gave them a format to follow, so that everyone we look at is the same, and we know what we're looking at, instead of having to filter through it and read it and highlight things.
Okay, any other, besides the resume, recommendations for, what needs to be evaluated?
This is just for the application process, right?
And Mary, I do want to raise a point, because I need enough to come back to you later. I think, it was Dr. August that you said that if we were going to include the critically affected area, did you want to include that in these other considerations?
I think we said no. I mean,
And that was for eligibility, but this is, for the selection process, so, no, we're striking.
Keeping it as broad.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can be, okay. Thank you, Sam, appreciate you keeping it right there. So, other committee recommendations. So ending out the process, committee member scores are averaged and the highest scoring applications are selected for funding. And we may need to provide a provision with the award going to the next highest applicants if they don't provide the statement of where they'll be practicing, or if for some reason they don't meet the eligibility requirements. Does that work with the committee?
Seems appropriate.
So in the previous section, do we need to put something about, stating where they're gonna go?
In the application process, is that?
Yeah, in the application and selection process, does that need to be talked about then, since we're gonna come back to it?
We did mention that earlier, that we would need to have some idea of what they're thinking.
Yeah, so we'll put,
I think
I just feel like we jumped from application to selecting.
So on the page you sent for, item 7 was the rural county, the applicant plans on practicing. So that bottom one up on the screen now,
Yeah.
Courtney.
so we'll be,
Yeah, so we struck that, didn't we?
Yeah, because that has to do with the veterinary medical.
Oh,
payment
okay,
program.
sorry, yep, excuse me.
Which is right, we do need to have something in there that gives us the information of what they're planning. I don't know if you call it a business plan, or what do you want to term it?
Yeah, I mean, it needs to be, they need to have some sort of declaration at some point.
so we can revise 7 rather than striking altogether, the rural county, the applicant plans, on practicing in,
a rural county the applicant plans on practicing,
Rural county or counties?
or counties, that's the, yeah, identification of.
Almost their business plan. So,
So far, I've got a comment.
yes, sir.
I hadn't seen any way in here, teachers teaching these students to be business people. And, I'm telling you, I'm appalled about this, I'm in the banking business, about what these students have spent. And they're not ever gonna get out from under a lot of this right here. They'll have to work for somebody else. No wonder these people are buying up these veterinary hospitals, because hell, the students can't go anywhere. Can't go to a loan in a bank when they go to a town. Somebody needs to address this right here now. I promise you, that's right here. You don't have to eat, big old steaks every month, just get you some cheese and crackers and not much of that. You follow me?
Yes, sir.
Oh, I don't understand this now.
So for the education of the students.
Oh, man, that running over and getting this loans, I just can't imagine it. I just can't imagine it. You're actually breeding smart poverty. That's what you're doing.
Sir, in the program, I don't know that we have a place we can insert that in the program, because we're on the back end of the student.
Well, it goes back to
having
the colleges. The colleges got to get a control of it.
Yes, sir. I think you got the audience here that can hear the message though, so we hear and we'll, that's why we're here.
Program will help with some of that.
Yeah, right.
Can we just ask them for a brief business plan of their rural county application, where they intend on practicing? You know, obviously, we want some idea of what, are y'all going to, what county you're going to, what's your plan look like, are they looking to serve a 5-county area? What's the plan?
And I think that goes to, us finding a candidate that'll be successful too, someone that's really thinking through. Thank you. When we took out the veterinary shortage area, we inadvertently cut that out. So thank you for bringing us back to it.
On number 6, I hate to beat this to pieces, but the demonstrate financial need, I mean, do they just have to have a loan and that's it, or are we wanting a full financial statement, or what do we need to make the decision?
And
I mean,
that's,
it's already defined in statute, so as long as they meet that criteria.
and this takes it further than what's defined in statute, because we got that as a basic eligibility, the 50% tuition and fees. So if you don't want to look at financial need beyond that, it would probably be wise to strike it again.
Thank you.
And I'll tell you, we'd seen where some other folks looked at academics, and we, in looking at it and what I've heard about students, we were just wanting a licensed applicant. You know, the academics, didn't seem to be appropriate, and maybe this is the same financial need.
Scholarship program.
Right. Any other recommendations as far as what you want to see as a committee looking at packets?
Okay, so you have on here A, B, C, applicants who do not have a rural community sponsor will be scored based on the evaluation criteria. What about applicants that do have a community sponsor?
They will just be based on eligible, do you meet the requirements by statute to be eligible for this program? Do you have a year, 50% of a year's worth of tuition and fees? Are you licensed where you need to be? Are you within 4 years of your graduation? We would pass it to the committee and leave it to those community sponsors to enter into agreements with the commission.
So none of the other stuff, the background, the involvement, the awards, none of that will go into play, correct?
Not with that.
They're not competing against others.
They're not competing.
So, I guess my question is, we need to state that somewhere, because our C is applicants who do not have a rural community sponsor. Do we need something that says applicants that do have a rural sponsor need to make sure all of the qualifications under statute are met, and that is the
end of it,
requirement, yeah.
you know what I mean?
That's a good suggestion, that, just for its clear.
The previous sections, we did put that, that they will not be scored or ranked against the committee. So you're asking us to make it more clear?
No, I just didn't know if it needed, since it was stated on one way, if it needed to be stated the other way as well.
I see the point. So we've got it in C, I just brought it back up, which will be in
Okay.
new D. But, we may just need to say application, evaluation, and selection process will be based on eligibility under whatever section for those students.
So do those applicants still have to apply?
They do.
Okay.
For these funds.
Right, right.
I presume there'll be a communication then, whether it's the whole committee reviewing or a subcommittee, that they know that this, this applicant does not have to be assessed in the same way as this one, so we'll see that this is a community-sponsored applicant.
Yeah, I guess that was my question, is how would you know, and is there a distinction between the two, I guess?
And
How would the evaluators know?
based on what Dr. Goa recommended on making it a fluid process, that may make it easier. You know, when we have general fund or federal funds, you might have a pool of applicants, whereas if you have a Willacy County that brings forward enough funds to pay for a year of school and wants to use this program, then we look for applicants specifically for that. It may be a different meeting to even look at those awards.
County may bring their applicants. I surely wouldn't wanna deny their money in their application.
Right, for sure. And we had a kickoff meeting, at the Capitol to discuss some of the criteria, and it was, we just need to make sure the statute is met for those, community sponsor applicants. Okay. Great addition with the bio and the business plan. I may not draft it to business plan, because that might be too specific, and but it will have the same effect. Other committee recommendations? And we're gonna move to, section D, and we talked about the scores are average and higher scores applicants. Any additional input, as far as the selection process? Do we want to rest that selection process with the committee for now, and then look at subcommittees or other components later on, or do we want to make that decision?
I think so long as you can do your Zoom calls like you talked about, where we don't all have to come together in a meeting location to get started until we figure out how this is gonna go. But y'all two gentlemen have more meeting demands than the rest of us, so y'all may wanna appoint somebody else.
At some time, we're gonna have to come to a consensus about a rubric for all of these different criteria, I think, so that the scoring will be objective from all of us, and that's gonna be a next step at some time, not for today necessarily, but.
Do we need to say, are we still thinking about a pre-selection period? Does that need to be talked about, or no?
I believe we moved away from that when we went back to having
Having it on the application?
the county on the application. That understanding correct? So we will talk about, when we get to our agendas, the capacity for the group to meet by video conference, and there are some limitations, but we'll talk about those as we get towards the end. We've got an hour. Denial of application, so 42.15, these are not very broad. If we need to add, I'll take any recommendations, but, the commission may reject an application without further consideration if the application is received after the deadline, which we moved away from, but I believe even if we have an RFA and we ask for a number of candidates, it could be relevant. So, incomplete or missing supplemental information, I've been in some selection process where you're trying to track down information after the fact, and I would think for administrative purposes that we don't want to be put in that position. And then The broad one does not meet the eligibility criteria, so that's gonna loop in the federal funds or what other limitations we may have moving forward with funding as well. So applicants, so we would say that are fourth-year students and are not licensed within, are ineligible to receive an award. Once licensed, an applicant may reapply. So I do need feedback on that.
What do you think? I mean, obviously, that's gonna affect students more than anything. You don't think 6 months after graduation is enough, or is it too short? What's your opinion on that?
Depends to some extent whether it's, which licensure they've failed to get, I suppose. You know, national boards are gonna be a bigger stumbling block for some students that may not be available until the following December, November, December again. State boards can be taken online, I believe, at any time.
So can we say 90 days, and if they don't have it by then, they just have to reapply the next year? 6 months, or what is it?
You don't wanna leave the whole program hanging and then find that there's a position that is uncertain and may not be filled.
The NAVLE windows are November, December, and then April, right?
Right.
Is there a fall window?
Goes all the way back to November, December, I think, for the next cycle after that.
Leaving it hanging for a long time.
Yeah, it is.
But maybe just a reapplication.
Do we wanna say that are not licensed at the time of the award, or then that's the problem with the open-ended?
And this is recent graduates.
Well, this could be your fourth-year graduates.
Would it help us, applicants that are recent graduates are not licensed at the time of award would need to reapply? And we decide when we award it, so there's a lot of flexibility there.
Could you repeat that? I wasn't fast enough.
Applicants that are recent graduates and are not licensed at the time of award would need to reapply.
This is for not the current fund. It almost needs to
Well, but
be.
applicants that are students would be recent graduates, right? So even if it's a student that then graduates, we're not gonna award them as a student, we would only award them as a graduate, so that would encompass everyone.
Can you get my mind around that?
But you wouldn't award it to them.
Make it qualified, right?
You'll get the money when you license. So if you have a student that you selected in May, and come September 1st, we want to have all the, so we can award them, if they still don't have their license, at that point, we would say, all right, you're gonna have to reapply. So we can determine what that date is, depending upon the year and the availability of funds. If you've got just one person applying and you've got one area where that money's gonna be being there, waiting for them, we'll just leave it open. If you've got 15 other applicants that are waiting for this person, and they don't get their stuff, we need to get it to the next person in line.
And the statute is originally drafted if there were state funding. If you were in that scenario, you're not gonna lose the money. It's gonna stay in the fund and be recredited to it. But we are in a situation for this first award that you're gonna lose it. You're gonna lose it.
Can you say something, I can't think of the full sentence to fit it out with what Stephen's saying, but preference will be given to applicants who?
Just say that, just the next sentence would be, preference would be given to
Applicants who are fully licensed at the time of, or whatever that might be, I have to think about it, but. Yeah, something along those lines, and preference will be given. That gives an incentive to people to get the exams out the way. And then clearly allows us to take a look at if somebody if we've got a line of people waiting who are fully qualified and one of the applicants we're interested in hasn't fulfilled all the licensures, then it gives us an opportunity to give preference to people who can fill slots on a timely basis.
And they can go to the back of the line and reapply.
Yeah.
I'm thinking from the denial of application that it may be better to put the preference in the selection process versus in the denial process.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. And then just make it clear that you'll be denied if you're not at the time. Andy, did you get everything? I did not, so.
Andy, when we get these, will we get the markup version so that we can see what was changed?
If you prefer, yes, I could keep it in track changes.
That would be helpful. The only reason I ask that is that way we can see make sure that our intent was received. If I don't know where we made the change, I won't know where it was. Thank you.
That helps me. Once we get through that, we'll move those on.
Is that still enough of a promise to incentivize someone to go to a rural area, though? The fact that I guess we would have told them, the committee would have said you're approved, and you'll get the money if you do all these things. I guess that's still the carrot, right, for them to go to that practice. We're not taking the carrot away by saying a preference is gonna be given.
Well, they gotta get a license to practice, so if they can't do their job to get a license, we're not gonna approve them. And if they're struggling to get that done, I don't know that we wanna put our money behind them.
That was part of, one of the reasons is we were focusing on graduates versus the student, because then you're guaranteeing money to someone that can use it. But I like the preference addition, because then that shows, especially right now, when you have funds that are moving out, if you're not using them, we're gonna use the money as quickly as we can to get somebody in these communities. Thank you.
And this question is not relevant to now, it's more future if we get state money. Given time, I'll hold on.
Okay, thank you. We'll make note of it, we can make sure we address it, when we reconvene for future. Okay. Rural community sponsors. And gotta thank TVMA and Trent for helping put heads together on just something for the committee to consider on 4217. Rural community political subdivision or a group of such entities may enter into an agreement to provide financial support to an eligible participant under the program if each participating community or political subdivision is located in a rural county, exists in perpetuity as a nonprofit entity government by council members, commissioners, or a board of trustees that is responsible to and serves the rural community in which it is located, is legally authorized to raise funds and or accepts grants and financial gifts from citizens, scholarship funds, or private foundations. They have not filed bankruptcy, and a contract between the sponsor and an applicant must include, but is not limited to, the following. The sponsoring community or political subdivision provides financial support to a vet an amount not less, and this is what's required by statute, not less than the tuition and fees required for a full academic year of study at an eligible school of veterinary medicine. The veterinarian agrees to practice veterinary medicine in the sponsoring rural community or political subdivision. Committee input for how long, and the veterinarian sets their charges at the prevailing rate for the area. Community sponsor deposits funds for the financial support of the veterinarian into the Rural Veterinary Incentive Program account.
Number one.
Yep.
Do they have to be located in a rural county, or could they not just be affiliated with a rural county?
That's for.
And the reason I say that is a rural community sponsor could be a municipality, it could be a business, or it could be a person.
Well,
Could it not, or does it?
it must be, rural community exists as a non-profit entity governed by council members, commissions, or board of trustees.
All right, so, but what if you had somebody like the TVMA that went, we're not in a rural county, we're not located. You're gonna have nonprofits that are, maybe have interest that their offices are in Houston, a foundation whose offices are not located, but they're affiliated with it because maybe their roots extend from that, and that there's family trusts all across South Texas whose location is in Houston because that's where the attorneys that run the office, but they're not located in that county.
that.
Grace is located in a rural county.
So it's not defined, so we can adjust.
I would just want some wiggle room to be affiliated with a rural county.
Do we even need it? As long as they're sponsoring someone going to a rural county, does it matter where the money comes from? Not to me, but I don't know that it does. I mean, I think about like people like HEB or, you know, doing community outreach and wanting to.
That's a great example. I mean, you've got those entities that are financially tied to the success of these rural counties that may want to provide money, and
I think we need to take it out altogether. I don't know. That's number one.
It's not as instructive, so we could remove this, I believe, as long as they're in perpetuity, they're not in bankruptcy. You know, you want to find a reliable entity, but it doesn't say they have to be in the community. The sponsor has to be in the community.
if you don't wanna strike it, again, the word affiliated gives you a lot of flexibility. I'm good either way.
HB 1259 says in exchange for eligible participants' agreement to practice veterinary medicine in the sponsoring community or political subdivision. So that seems like it has to be,
Somehow tied to the community.
yeah. But I see what you're saying about the goal.
You can define tied to the community.
Right.
Or they have producers that they provide their produce from.
Community is where it's a little more open than your political subdivision. Your political subdivisions will be defined. So I'll look into that and go as broad as we possibly can, that's permitted by statute. So whether it's an affiliation or taking it out, make a recommendation. And Trent, we do need to flag that one for clarification. Sandy, did you get everything? Thank you. Okay. So do we want to, as a committee, specify how long this service commitment should be for these rural sponsors? Do we want to tie it to what we do, and we're going to discuss it shortly, to our, whether it's federal funds or state funds, or do you want the committee or the community sponsors to have the discretion to decide what they're going to require in an award? Would 1 year make a difference, 3 years?
So let me ask you this question. Is this intended for them to fully fund this, or is this intended for them to partner? Because let's say we as a community, or committee, say, the students and the veterinarians have to commit to 5 years. But the community will say, well, we can't commit to 5, but we could seed it for 2 years, and this committee and our funding would seed it for the next 3 years.
Right.
If that's the case, I wouldn't want any restrictions on what the community has to give. Let them give what they can, which is a bonus to us, because then we can stretch our dollars broadly. But let them know that, hey, we're trying to fund this for 5 years. Right. They do 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, it doesn't matter.
I don't think there's any way that we could expect them to have to be prescriptive about this for the communities. There's just no way. It's going to come, Stephen said it's going to come forward to us in all kinds of proposals. And so
it could be as set out in the agreement with the community sponsor or political subdivision.
Right.
And to your point, it's a really good point on whether or not this could be a bonus type, or not a bonus, but in the veterinary medical loan repayment program, it's typically a 3-year award, I believe, but there is room for a 4th-year award as the committee determines. And so I don't know how it would work with the community sponsors, but there is some framework where you get 4 with us, and then you'll be reconsidered in the fifth year. And that's something we will need to think about because of the federal funds limit us to 2026. If we want this to be a 5-year program, where do you get that funding for that additional year? It's a challenge to say we're gonna do that by rule because you're talking about unknown funds, but maybe we could work that in as where the committee can consider an additional year depending on funding, to get you to that fifth year. Requiring that the veterinarians set their charges at the prevailing rate for the area. Any concerns or questions or need for that to be, do we want to monitor that?
No, you need to avoid that.
Um,
State board will tell you to avoid that.
okay. That was part of some other programs, so that's coming out.
Yeah.
And then how long is determined by agreement. Really digging in, and this is, the amount of repayment assistance, and I'd like to lead this by leaning on Dr. August and any others that have some information they can share about debt loan. So just from the standard awards, the federal award that we know of right now, assuming all eligibility requirements are met, beneficiary status is met, you're looking at about $900,000 that would need to be obligated by 2024 and expended by 2026. And that's assuming we're able to use those broader terms that are provided in the Department of Treasury versus the state bill limitation. So $900,000 is about what you're looking at. And if it is not obligated by December 2024, it gets returned. And then if it's not expended by 2026, it's not expended, also gets returned. So we're looking at two different thresholds. For the state funds, you're obligated and accrued by 2023.
I think we're gonna have to have two different sets of rules. One set of rules for this money.
Right.
And then for future funds, depending on where we go.
And I've thought about it, I don't have good guidance on it yet, but we could even have a grandfathering clause where this is applies until 2026 or with these funds, and then it goes away when those funds expire. So just, and I wanted y'all to know that for looking at its amount of repayment, but I don't want that to be the deciding factor. I want debt loan and what you all consider would be meaningful to meet the goals of this program in deciding what the price point is. So let's, Dr. August, if you don't mind sharing about the debt.
So you had asked if we could bring some information about student debt to the meeting, and fortuitously, the American Veterinary Medical Association 2021 report on the economic state of the veterinary profession came to our attention very, very recently with information about the debt of the class of 2020. And my colleagues at work extracted 3 relevant pages out of this. It's part of a full report. You've got a copy of the hard copy of that. There's a link at the bottom of the cover page there. All of these graphics came straight out. These were just pages 20, 21, and 22, I believe, of that report. And I'm no expert on this by any means, but I think if you take a look at page 20 inside, it's listed as page 20, you can see the wide variation of debt that we have within our students. There's the mean. Those that do have some debt that didn't leave, and we have students who leave with no debt, you can see it's about 188. If you take a look at the back page, this is one time when A&M is very proud to be the bottom of the heap in the nation. But you can see the wide variety of median debt compared to median income across the nation, and
You're at the bottom on debt, but you're at the top on income.
well, we that's due to a lot of hard work from a lot of people, and does mean that I think we're the only university where median income is higher than median debt, and but doesn't mean to say that we've still got a lot of students who leave, and from both the universities who will leave with significant debt loads that are there. I sort of leave you to take a look at this, and I think you have to go back and nationwide mean debt for those with debt, 188,000. And as somebody mentioned earlier on, from the Caribbean schools, it could be 400 to 500,000. And if you take a look at page 21 there, median debt by college in the lower part, I think that 87 is our median debt at A&M. The Caribbean schools are not included in this list.
To that point, we had a stakeholders meeting months ago. One of the messages that was told by the stakeholders, there was Texas Farm Bureau, there was Department of Ag, but there were a lot of folks in the room. And one of the things that they talked about was this program should be meaningful. Meaning, what is it gonna take to tie these folks to the community and then having a meaningful impact to get their debt paid off? In just circulation of that conversation, it was 5 years and $180,000. Not everybody needs $180,000, especially if they graduated from Texas A&M. So could we tie that to where you can get up to 180, or anything below, you gotta commit to 5 years? Now, I would throw that out there as a place for us to start discussing the award and the timeline. And the data on here shows 188,000 as the median. So that's where the number comes from. If you gave everybody $180,000, you're talking 5 students. But if we were to have an impact in 5 communities across the state of Texas this first go-around, that'd be a home run.
And I was taking notes, Dr. August, can you explain for me, and for those that are on the phone, the handout shows mean veterinary debt at $157,146, and then mean debt for those with debt is $188,853.
So the mean veterinary debt overall is including students with no debt. That third column there, basically that's what it's saying. For those with debt, it's 188, but for all students across the nation, it's 157 because 17% leave veterinary school with no debt. That's what that's saying. Okay, make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Took me a little while to understand that one.
And I'd heard through the source that the salary for the last graduating class was 106,000, but this is showing.
Yes, Doc, you think these individuals are very good businessmen?
Some of them are really good. Some of them not. About the same percentage of my class that were good. I would think most of them going into rural practice are going to be better than others, just because of the nature of the beast. But there's obviously a room for improvement.
These are 2020 figures.
Okay.
Not the class of 2021.
Okay.
So
It's a 2021
report back on the class of 2020.
Thank you.
Maybe, Doc, that's something we should require in our selection process is business acumen. You bring up a point.
I recommend it.
Good point.
So for the conversation and based on that stakeholder input, you'll see the second group that we provided 3 options in the rules that were sent and that are online. But the second option has a staggering amount of the service period. And we're doing it either based on the award, you know, if a person has $180,000 in debt, if that's the number we land on, then they can be $180,000, and then a second period, it could be, I had it based off $170,000, so my numbers are a little skewed, but you know, $20,000 the first year, $30,000 next year, and then it escalates higher with a higher percentage each year, to encourage that student to stay for that last payment, which has more value, you know, if it's a $60,000 award or $50,000 award. And then we have the percentage in there to account for the students that have the low end of debt, but at least 50% of 1 year. That's one option. the veterinary medical loan repayment program and some other programs do not stagger it. They do a base award each year, up to $25,000, assuming there's that much debt. So those were some considerations. No input for administering it, easier, to do that one-time payment, but as long as it's laid out in the structure and the award and the agreement, it also make that award based on a percentage basis. So that's something to consider as we're considering the 5-year and the 4-year. For the federal program, there is not an avenue for the federal funds. So that's, do we do the staggering for the federal funds for 4 years, or it may be 3 years based on by the time we get this program running?
Could we pay off the money within the timeline, but they still have a 5-year commitment, and if they leave, they've got to pay the money back?
My understanding is, not with the ARPA funds. It has to be earned by 2026. And so with the federal funds, you're limited because they can't earn it after December 2026. If there were a community sponsor or some other funding, we could, but we don't have that option.
I like the idea of staggering, because it keeps them on the hook for balloon payments, and we talked about this. On the downside is they're accruing interest every year. So 5% in the first year, their interest is typically going to be 6 to 7%. I think there's some real pros to ballooning it, and there are some downsides in that they could be capitalizing unpaid interest in that time period, so the debt's growing.
And that's one component of this program that I believe is remedied. I don't know if it was intentional, but right now, the board, the Higher Education Coordinating Board, is reading the statute that it requires, once we designate an awardee, they pay that awardee and their lender the full amount of the award. And so if they have $180,000 in debt, which is gonna be a challenge on the back end if we have somebody breach, but if they receive the award, they get the payment. And so there's benefits in that it knocks down the interest right away. But it's then, in the promissory note, you say, after first year, you earn 20% of what that debt was. Because the promissory note is them paying back, agreeing to pay back what they do not earn under the receipt.
So they're still gonna have a note out with this,
with the university system,
right?
yes, and so,
It would be nice, nothing against university system, it would be nice if it would go back to this program, because not only we have to change the statute, but that way we would have, if people took our money and they didn't fulfill the obligation, well, then the loan would come back to this program to fund future, but that's not the way it was written.
Mary, look, three-way promissory note.
That would help.
Both systems, we just have to get 3 state agencies to agree on promissory notes.
I see there's only one GC present, so we wanted to get through the meeting.
You're not getting retired.
Yeah, you're done.
So that's the benefit on the interest side, other than they breach and if we have interest built into that note. But for this first one, we can't.
In my opinion, to take advantage of interest is the biggest expense. You look at the life of the loan, it's the biggest expense. And I know we're taking some risk, but again, our intention is to try to solve the problem. There's gonna be risks with everything. In my opinion, we take the risk and try to hold them accountable with the repayment option.
So for the repayment option on the promissory note, would it be the committee's recommendation to do same amount every year or the stagger? It seems like there's some value in the stagger.
I think if it's because it's a promissory note, right? You're just handing over one note to someone else, and except that they're not repaying it back, they're earning it back.
Right.
And so earning it back makes sense if it's even across the years, I think.
I don't think the incentive for the staggering overcomes the benefit of getting rid of some interest. I think it should be even, you know what I mean? I don't,
Well, the whole note will be paid, right? So
Right.
that's gone.
right,
So it's now, they've got essentially a non-financial note to the university system
right.
that they're earning their way out of that through
I just-
indentured servitude, if you will.
Exactly what it is, but I think it's cleaner, just leave it level.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't think the staggering has enough of a benefit. I think
Yeah.
leaving it even is just as much got them on the hook as.
But that interest reduction does have a
Right,
Yeah.
Yes.
Huge.
Right.
That's the
Right.
win.
right.
So fixed amount, and there was discussion of up to 180. Maximum is 180, no minimum is my takeaway. Is the only minimum would be 50% of tuition and fees that's required by statute.
So what did we decide, when you say fixed amount, what did we decide on?
We haven't decided on a dollar amount yet.
No,
I would say whatever that dollar amount is, it would be 20% each year.
yeah, got it, okay.
Now we have to decide what
I
dollar
agree.
amount are we
On
gonna
the-
do.
No, that makes sense.
On the ARPA one, it would be by 2026,
By 2020.
it would be divided equally from the award
Yeah,
to that.
got it.
So if we looked at the language that was provided for fixed amount, the very first one, for each service period, so with a minimum of X years, it's page 6 of the proposed rules, of obligated service, the eligible applicant may receive repayment assistance of X per year of the program participant's qualifying loan. So this focuses on a minimum. We need to require a minimum, and what would be the committee's recommendation, with a maximum of, it sounds like 5 years, knowing that this may be limited by ARPA funds. But the way it's drafted here, it allows some flexibility that will spell those details out in the agreement. And then if we're going, it looks like Dr. Gullo might be doing the numbers for me, and I appreciate that.
Well, if you're gonna use, we should talk about what do we think that top dollar should be for the broad program, because the ARPA is a 2-year or is it 3-year?
ARPA can go out to 2026, so it depends on how soon we get it
24,
implemented.
25,
We could go 4,
Okay.
but that's assuming everything is just right with the timing.
If you use the 180,000, that's 36,000 per year, which is significantly higher than the federal program. Unless they wouldn't have $180,000 in debt, which whatever their debt is, say it's 100, you divide that by 4, it would be 25,000 a year. To me, that's the only fair way with these funds to allocate it, that would then be consistent going forward. And this committee, every 2 years, as we have new people appointed, could reestablish what that dollar amount total should be based upon inflation and those things.
Will they have to pay income tax on
There are some tax consequences
Yeah.
that are associated with it. And so that would be not part of the rules, but part of the application process that they'd be advised on. There are some programs that pull out taxes, and that's just too much for ours, but there is obviously a benefit.
I know in the federal program, there's an effort to get it taken out, it's still in there, still taxed on it. But Dr. Gullo, if we're trying to encourage them to stay or something, and you give them set amount per year, are you thinking decreasing the amount per year to make the last 5, to get a 5-year commitment out of it essentially, or is that what you were saying, or?
No, we only have 4 years.
4 years.
The maximum with the ARPA funds would be 180,000 minus 36, whatever that is, 144,000, because they would only serve 4 years. We want a 5-year commitment.
I got you, yeah.
The 5 years typically ties them, at that point, they either fall in love with the spouse or the community, one or the other. 3
Yeah.
years, they're just waiting their time to move back wherever they came from, or, that's the thought behind it. Whether that's gonna actually happen, I don't know, but that's the thought behind it.
Do you think that would limit applicants to say, oh man, gotta commit to 5 years?
They're not committed to 5 years, they don't wanna be in rural practice. We don't want them.
What if they switched to a different county that was still a rural county? What if they changed,
This is about rural America, it's not about just one location.
Still happy in the state of Texas.
What's the recommendation? Fixed amount, minimum of 4 years. I know the goal with a maximum of 5 for the payment. Would we pay someone that stays for 3 years? And how it is, they'll get paid, if they stay for 3 years.
I want a minimum of 4. The only reason that I would say a minimum of 4 is because of the ARPA funds. Otherwise, I would want 5. I would want to consider anything less than 5. Because they're not gonna stay. They're gonna come get their money and they're gonna go.
Do we have to have a minimum and a maximum, or can we have a set number of years and then have a qualifying statement about federal funds?
We can do that, I envision the promissory note's going to be, is you get your first year, and then you don't have to pay that back if you serve those 12 months.
Correct.
Next year, you don't have to pay that back. If you get to your 3rd year, so we don't have to limit it because the agreement will say that will be a breach of contract, and the penalty is you have to pay the 4th and 5th year back, to the program, which is gonna be a different challenge for the collection process, which is why it was advisable to pay as we go, but that's not how it plays out.
I like the idea of a 5-year program.
Let's do,
And obviously, we're limited on ARPA.
yeah, let's do a 5-year program with that takeaway, fixed funds, that's what I'm taking, right? And then we'll provide the grandfathering clause related to the ARPA funds. In that time, by the time we get all the answers to this particular funding, we may be closer to 3 years, but we'll do the maximum we can with that federal fund.
This is policy, we can always change policy.
180 for
And is
the educational debt, whichever is less.
Correct. 180 or the educational debt, whichever is left.
They'll be eligible with the 50%, just
So-
being able to apply.
If we decide to award someone, do we automatically take over 100% of their student debt, or can we, as a committee, decide this person has $80,000 in debt, but we only wanna award 30?
Why would we do that?
Well, because let's say we have $500,000 of money to award, and person A got 100, and person B got 100, and person C got 100, and person D only had 50,000, so we've got 50,000 more dollars to use. Would you count someone out that had more than $50,000 worth of student debt, or would you apply it, as it's repaying their student debt, it's just not repaying all of it?
The only thing I would tell you is, from what I remember from our meeting, is if we wanted to make this impactful to people to go back, take away all their debt, take that pressure off of them with their commitment to serve. No different than the military.
So the 50 just sits.
So what Courtney's talking about is if you've got a list, and you've gone down and all, complete debt, up, or this one's got less borrowing, you go down the list, and then the next person on the list has $80,000 in debt, but you've only got $30,000 left over.
Well, yeah, of course.
Can you apply that to someone's debt, even though you're not assuming all of their debt?
I understand. I thought you were saying pick winners and losers, like we're only gonna give this person, I understand.
No, I mean, sorry, the way it reads, it seems like we're assuming each applicant that we choose we're assuming 100% of their student debt.
Up to 180,000.
Right, and if we have some money left over, can we assume 25% of someone's debt, or 50, or 75? You know what I mean? Because we have a little money left over.
I think we can work that in, subject to the availability of funding type language on the front end of these, because one of the questions is the number of recipients. And your number of recipients, if this were a stagnant, or not stagnant, but a standard number, you could say, we'll have enough for 10 recipients. With the ARPA funds, it's not gonna replenish. But it's not gonna replenish, so you're gonna wanna use it. So, we can have an ideal number of recipients. What can we get 900,000 out of 180? But then, assume you only have 2 that have a full 180. It's a great point. It's something that I didn't work into the equation that needs to be there.
Were you proposing on the ARPA funds to set the maximum to 144?
Yeah.
144.
Yeah.
Because it's a 4-year program, and if it was 180 over 5 years.
Right.
Did you catch that, 144 for the ARPA fund?
I highly recommend you, professors, get on that, about this, start eating weenies and crackers. That's what we eat down at A&M, that's, you see that low number down here, knock it down here. I'm serious about it, man, that has a lot of data, has a lot of data.
We had that in the first semester.
Sure, I'm begging you to.
It's gonna be 144 and not the 180
For the ARPA.
for the ARPA, okay.
Or whatever amount
Left.
distributes across once we get the funds implemented. Just a reminder, we still have some limitations that shorten that by state.
And we're gonna get this in draft form.
So, I still haven't gotten my mind around this, someone who doesn't owe that much money, say they owe $50,000, and they're going somewhere and they want to pay, so would we approve them for a year and a half worth, you know?
4 years.
It's still 4 years to get that
They're
50,000.
50,000, they want this
Okay,
money.
that's what I was trying to ask earlier,
Yeah,
yeah.
the commitment has to be for them to be in this community. And the incentive is, we are gonna knock out your debt up to 180,000.
I got you, okay, I understand now, thank you.
And the nice thing for that debt, whether they're 50,000 or 150,000, is paid in lump sum upfront. So that's a benefit.
The 36,000 is only if you owe more than 144,000.
Gotcha, yeah,
If you
yeah.
owe 100,000, then you would get 25,000 a year. You wouldn't still get the 36,000 a year.
That, I understand now,
Because then we
yeah.
can stretch that money
Yeah.
to up front.
Yes.
We've got 15 minutes left on our designated time. I wanted to talk, and this goes back to Dr. Graham's position, and, I understand and we appreciate that these rural veterinarians are not limited to 40 hours. You know, more than likely, they're working much more than that. As the other grant programs, physicians programs look at a proration, you know, where, let's say there is a disability or a reason a person is not putting in 40 hours, that person would be eligible. I don't know if it fits this program, but I wanted it to be a consideration point.
It's gotta be full-time.
Or more.
No, I.
You can define what full-time is in
Yeah, that,
rural practice. It's not 40 hours a week.
I suspected it wasn't a good fit, but wanted to make sure we discussed it.
I guess specifying full-time service agreement.
Yes, so that would be 40 hours. At least 40 hours. But there, and it may, it's more than likely more than that. There will be-
Here, I think.
Thanks.
Let's be honest, there's not, I don't know of a mixed animal rural practice that they don't work more than 40 hours. And are successful.
So other, provisions that we have included that's asked you to review if you hadn't had a chance to, but I didn't have big discussion points for the group, is what makes an eligible lender an eligible education loan. You'll see in this, we drafted with some specific language, and part of that is we heard from other programs where folks were looking at, loans from parents or grandparents and things like that, and expecting those to be part of what would make an eligible loan, and that's not, that we can't verify that, and the Higher Education Coordinating Board has a system where they see, qualified loan debt, so that's clarified in our definitions in here. So then conditions and award, again, not a lot of talking points there, but, I do wanna go through those. They must execute an agreement with the university system, so that's still a discussion point, but that's what's required in statute. I'm sorry, did I interrupt someone?
I was just gonna ask, the loans have to come through the university system, or could it be any qualified
It would be, we have it defined by definition, please. Let me get to
Whatever it is in statute, it is what.
the board retains the right to determine the eligibility of educational loan providers to which payments may be made. An eligible lender or holder shall, in general, make or hold education loans made to the individual for purpose of undergraduate or veterinary medical education, shall not be a private individual. An eligible lender or holder may be, but is not limited to a bank, savings, loan association, credit union, institution of higher education, secondary market, government agency, or private selling. We were trying to go to what would count except for private loans.
John?
Yeah, I don't know, I'm still a little confused as to why it says university system here. I'm just still confused about that.
Me too, except it's in statute. That is why it says that.
With a university system.
So what's the agreement? Is the agreement that's referenced here the promissory note?
So this is the provision, and it may have been too vague when I started out about some challenges with House Bill 1259 and what we're looking into. We believe that's holdover language from when the program was with A&M.
Okay, got it.
But that's what it's referring to.
Early 2000s, so maybe there were some loans through the university.
Yeah, okay, that's it.
John, sorry, on this note, some federal loans start accruing interest, although they're not collecting on it, so it's capitalizing unpaid interest while they're in vet school, I think.
Yes, that's true.
So, because we need to be not so careful in the eligible costs.
Okay.
To pay for the cost of attendance of veterinary school. So,
Would you give me the specific number? So,
sorry, on page 5, 42.19B1,
okay.
because some of their eligible loans will be interest accrued and capitalized while they're in vet school, even though it's not a cost of attendance to vet school, if that makes sense. All right.
But interest would be a cost if you had to borrow the money.
Well, yes, some loans, the interest begins after graduation, and other loans begin before. So if it's all rolled in as educational loan debt at the time of graduation, that's...
I wouldn't
cost of,
I appreciate you pointing that out, and we'll make sure it's broad. Could you repeat that, Sandy?
The loans, like federal loans, they're subsidized and unsubsidized, and that's where the difference is, like some do charge interest and some don't.
That's a good point.
So, we thank you, you slowed us down to identify an issue with one or a clarification. Not have been made to cover costs incurred after completion of veterinary school. Not be in default at the time of application. Not have an existing obligation to provide service for loan forgiveness through another program. So, that's something we need to revisit based on our DMLRP language.
What number are you?
That's, B4.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we're not gonna pay off something that's already been paid off, but just because they had some of their loan, what if they owe $250,000, they get 20, yeah, we just need to cover that.
I'll work with the higher education coordinator, they'll be the ones consulting the loan, the lender themselves, and so we'll make sure I work that out with the experts on it. So then 6, if the loans were consolidated with other loans, which may get to some of the purposes, they need to provide documentation for the portion of the consolidated debt that was originated to pay for the cost of attendance, for the applicant's veterinary medical education. So I have a note here, that we need to look at to see if we can stand beyond tuition and fees. But those tuition and fees would be the easiest to prove, if their costs were warranted.
I hate to add, Liza, that some of the educational debt may be undergraduate educational debt.
And I do have that as a question. Are we,
I think the educational debt at the time of graduation, right?
Absolutely, you can't get a veterinary medical education without
go to
undergraduate debt. I mean, we'd all love to just go straight to vet school, but.
I have it. You got to my question before I could ask it. So we're open to it being any educational debt, assuming the statute allows. Okay. And then 7 is a interesting one, but we revised from other programs that it's necessary.
That makes sense. A little loophole there, you just closed.
Yeah. We talked about 21 in detail, 23 conditions of award. Recipient must execute an agreement, and we've identified the university system language there. We're still working through that. Then they need to provide veterinary medical services in a rural county for 1 calendar year for each academic year for which the recipient receives financial support under the program. That's tying back to some language that was in statute about academic years. The recipient signs a promissory note acknowledging the conditional nature of the financial support received under the program and promises to repay the amount of financial support and any applicable interest and reasonable collection costs if the recipient does not satisfy the conditions of the agreement. And so that's something I'll need to be working through with the university.
On that, can we, in this, provide an example so that people understand?
An example of the promissory note?
Like, let's say they default on year 3, what is owed?
Okay. I will make a note of it. I haven't worked on it, but I think that's a reasonable, especially for these students who may not appreciate.
That's right.
Yeah.
They think they're gonna just be able to quit early and be done, and there's gonna be a penalty.
So does that mean they don't get any of it? Or they
No.
get
It gets to
Okay.
3 years,
they just have to pay that?
depending on where they default in that. So the recipient must comply with applicable, and that's up to the committee, but that's how it was proposed. You could say if you don't say 5, you're done. But I don't know if that's the will.
I prefer, if we're committed to this money, my opinion.
Hold the toast to the fire.
It's right. I mean, do you really wanna do this, or are you just trying to do this to get money? And we want folks to be in rural, and we complain for years, we don't have enough rural practitioners. We need to hold their feet to the fire. If you wanna be a rural practitioner, here you go. If not, don't do it.
If you allow, I feel like if you allow them to retain the first and second and third year, then people are going to become part of this program and stay for a couple years.
Sure.
And then leave and repay their debt with a couple years paid off.
I think it needs to be all or none, personally.
I agree.
I will take that.
You get to collect.
I will take that back to the entities that have worked into a lot of these. I think that's part of why a lot of the programs are structured where you get paid as you go versus on the back end because of collection issues. I would not be the collecting entity. We would refer it to the Office of the Attorney General, so I just want to get their feedback on that provision. But I hear you. If that's what the goal of the program is to have a long-term service there, then.
I'm a professional student, and I'm defaulting my loan. The last thing I want is a letter from the Office of the Attorney General. I think that would carry a lot of weight.
Okay, so, this will change, so that will change 2, or 1. So we'll look at this with the intent of the committee that it's 5 for 5, get all or nothing.
What does everyone else think? Nobody?
No, I agree.
A lot of nodding
Yeah,
heads.
I agree.
It's a lot of money. It's not like we're just giving them $10,000.
I mean, I agree. I just,
Committee to knocking out their debt.
I know.
And that's the biggest reason why.
Well, the program is assuming all of the risk, right? They're paying off the note from day one. The note is paid off, and all of the risk resides with, well, right now, the university system. The system.
I'm gonna young man in Luling, Texas, he'll sign up tomorrow, and he will stay the 5 years and won't question it.
Right.
Because he's gonna be there for 20.
Right. I mean, I think, I agree, I agree, but.
He knows that. That's where he's from, that's his family.
Mhm.
Well, how many students, quit after their first year? I mean, I think it's a great idea, but I think that's gonna limit your application for sure.
From a employer in a rural area, and I don't know, maybe you on it too, but if they're gonna quit after 2 years, I don't even want them.
Yeah, it takes about 3
I don't
to even get there, but I had one associate for 9 years. We've been joined at the hip now for over 20 years. Of course, he's a practice owner now. Yeah, they wanna be there, they're gonna be there.
Right. Okay, and let's do a show of hands. Like, I think everybody was in agreement on that, but everybody's in on 5 for 5. And thinking about it. Okay, so 7 of the 8 committee members want to see language on all-in, type of payment. Either you stay for the full service term, 5 years, or you don't apply. Okay. Thank y'all for slowing down and let's going through that.
If we do that, would we be able to allow for extenuating circumstances?
I think there's always an opportunity to come back to the committee, and here's a good example. Let's say there's an ethical issue with the person you're working with, and that maybe there is a partner in the plan. And there's something that goes, I think there's always an opportunity to come back to the committee and ask for input.
Can we add language, like if, in the rule that is an opportunity?
Absolutely. That's appropriate.
And there is something similar in the veterinary medical loan repayment program, I just hadn't anticipated, but I need to look back in, where they can come back to the committee and provide justification. And so when we're talking about this, is it 5 for 5 in the county designated, or any rural county?
I think there should be an opportunity to come back to the committee and say, hey, I want to transfer to another area, and I'm gonna fulfill my obligation. I think there's nothing wrong with that. Things that we have to take into consideration is disease. What if somebody comes down in their 3rd year with a severe case of lupus or cancer? I mean, none of us want to punish that person for that. So, there needs to be an outlet for that opportunity, for sure.
And we do have disability provided for in the rule. We had accounted for that. Death, a proration, that rule would apply to the survivors, assuming. So we're gonna need to build on that. Then I'm gonna keep ticking through the list so we can get through, right now. Provide veterinary medical services in a qualifying county for the duration of the obligated service period. Cooperate with the commission and committee if information relevant to the program is requested. So on that, is there any particular reporting the committee would want related to this program?
I mean, their declaration, but that's gonna be prior to, right?
I just think leave it open in case there's an issue and the committee wants to know more information.
And we had talked about an affidavit each year stating that they are practicing in the service area that they had originally designated, it's something general along those lines. And so that would be 5, submitting periodic statements to commission certifying compliance with program and requirements in accordance with the reporting timeline. For the ARPA funds, we'll probably have some additional requirements.
Is there a 4 in there, or did that just get misnumbered?
It just misnumbered, thank you. And then, we'll look at C, and that may not be necessary since we'll be paying the loan. So on A, 42.25, annual loan repayment amount may be dispersed in a form of a lump sum. It looks like it needs to be the loan repayment based on how the statute structured, not the annual loan repayment. We're doing it all up front and then a promissory note for the back end issue. The board will follow the IRS requirements for reporting of loan repayment assistance to veterinarians during each calendar year. this is the affidavit we talked about, then, breach of contract. And we're still working through this, but it may need to be the multiple agencies, and the universities here. It says interest assessed may be up to the highest rate allowed by law, and commences with the date of the first, or the disbursement. Drafted as if we were doing satisfaction is when all terms are met, or the veterinarian who entered into the agreement due to disability is unable to meet the requirements of the program, whenever they have no eligible loan balance to repay. In the event of a veterinarian's death, it will be prorated based on the percentage of full-time service provided by the veterinarian during the service period, and then disability will be prorated.
On the event of a veterinarian, death, is that in statute?
We've looked at some other programs on what to do.
Obviously, that impacts the family, especially if the spouse has to assume the veterinarian's death. Would there be any temperature in the room to just fully fund the obligation upon death of the veterinarian?
I am supportive of that.
Upon review of the committee.
Yeah.
It has to be automatic.
I think it's a good idea.
And obviously, if the wife shot the husband.
I was just gonna say, that might lead to an untimely death.
Especially for rural practitioners, right?
It's happened before.
But, I mean, that's a huge burden on the veterinary family. We're here to support that. To me, that's a perfect opportunity to help a veterinary family.
As it's written at the moment, we're retiring all the debt up front. Right?
Yeah, I think we
Promissory
just-
note would still.
The promissory note should go bye-bye.
Yeah, so that, yes, agreed.
Just put that as a note.
Death or with the disability, or either,
Well, with disability, there's at least insurance they can rely on. But I guess it would be the same there as well.
And this is getting me back in a practice days, but would the family assume the debt? The debt is sustainable, you know, so and so we wanna look at it for the goal of the program is to make sure we have the funds available to distribute to other veterinarians, but it's just making it a little more research.
And then this would be a good place to put concerns of early exit to be reviewed. I guess there would need to be something in there. Is this where you would put that?
I think it would need to be a different, but it could be a subpart.
Extenuating circumstance.
To be reviewed by the committee. That should be
Okay, so, we talked about reporting requirements, we talked about, this are our last considerations under these rule guidelines. Timing of application, evaluation, and selection process is gonna be more open-ended than we had originally contemplated, but for need, based on some things that are brought up. We talked about the committee, subcommittee panels for evaluation and, informal comment period and publication goals is where we need to circle back. So quickly, for the committee, we can meet by video conference for an open meeting so long as our chair is present at the location designated in the notice, and all other members can, if you want to be counted present, are visually seen at the time of video conferencing. And so, assuming we have the capacity, the interest, we can have a video conference meeting. The challenge is if you drop off, we could lose quorum, and we couldn't make any decisions or take action as. So, if the committee wishes, we can take up these issues through a video conference process, but we would probably need to practice with our IT department and your technology to make sure we'll all be able to meet the requirements of the Open Meetings Act. If you're unpresent, if your internet drops, if we cannot see your face during that video conference, you will not be counted present. So, and if we have half of the membership, one more than half, not being visibly seen, we'll have to pause the meeting. There's some,
Can you have a combination of both, or some in the building, and then others are on?
absolutely, we can,
Andy
as
will
long.
have someone to sit with in the building.
It's lonely here at the top.
So we can have a hybrid.
That'd be great, I'm all for it.
So we wanted to bring that up, wanted to meet in person first time, and sometimes we have some technology challenges ourselves that we need to work through. But if that is convenient for the committee, we'll start trying those out for our next meetings. Informal comment period. So the plan would be to revise the rules based on the feedback we received today, try to get some additional clarification on some of the outstanding points about the university system and the ARPA funds, and then resend the rules to the committee for review. You can send me your comments back. We cannot talk amongst committee members, that would violate quorum requirements, and we have to discuss this in open meetings. But then once I receive those feedback, I can send it back out to the committee. And my thought, because we had some pretty substantial changes and things that we needed to work through, is we're not ready for Texas Register publication. I think we need to have another meeting probably before we go to that step, but we may be close after we send out the versions and get your feedback to do informal comment, where we send it out and let other veterinarians and veterinary students and interested parties comment. So I'd like this committee's feedback on your thoughts on where we are. Should we do the informal process after I've received your comments on the full draft?
I agree with that. Give us the revisions that you've made, let us comment, and then we can go informal.
Agreed.
Yeah, I've just got one question. I don't want to belabor it. I'm looking at the very last section here.
Yes, sir.
Satisfaction of practice obligations. How do we know that the investment is living up to expectations? How do we know that this person that we or the commission has invested in is working hard to make a difference in that community and is meeting that county's expectations? Is there any feedback in any of these programs that comes from the county officials or anybody else, to whether it's medical or otherwise, to make sure that the investment is being used properly, wisely?
Great point, maybe we should require some type of annual report.
And that was the question of, do we require any reporting? And I had in my question data, and I don't know how you get that, but as a committee, we could come up with it. But the certification that they're providing services, I don't know if we need a third-party verification of that, like.
Could have a questionnaire that either their superior could fill out or a leading member of their community. Like if you own your own practice.
As part of their certification of services, right? Each year, and we could build that in.
Just have a questionnaire that, I don't know. Kinda like an.
Can we do it through the Texas Animal Health Commission field representative? Since Texas Animal Health Commission is properly.
I would not want that conflict for the Animal Health Commission, if that makes sense.
Could they carry the paperwork to the county judge's office and have them for you? Just need somebody, you're talking about third party, there's some local validation that yes, the veterinarian is here, we see them servicing, and.
We've had no complaints.
I think county judge is probably the place to go.
Gosh, I'm trying to think that when you.
Let's circle and think.
Let me think on that. I'll look at other programs. I didn't see it as part of another program except for the certification of services.
But to Dr. August's point, I mean, we really kind of want to know.
If somebody shut their doors every day at 5 and the people were having trouble, and
Maybe they're never available, and.
Take your
Thank
time
you,
now,
Dr.
but
August.
That's a good point.
We'll informal comment period after we've regrouped on the recommended changes, and then, once we're to that point, typically, Dr. Schwartz on our agenda, we go to future rulemaking. So I don't know. Let me get back. So we'll regroup and talk about that date. We do have public comment.
Okay, so we're done with agenda item 8. Moving on to agenda item 9, public comment. I just checked with the name and we don't have public comment.
But do we have anyone in the room that would like?
Public comment at this point? No public comment. All right.
So for the future agenda, future meetings is our.
Okay, the agenda item 10, the next time when do we meet again and how?
If it's okay with the committee, we can poll the group, as Amanda did, to get the dates for this meeting, and then we could circle that, once we are through the informal rulemaking process.
Great. Well, if there's any final comments or anything? We're sticking with it. Amazing amount of material and